The moving crew didn't knock. They just came in. 6 men in matching gray uniforms, clipboards in hand, boots tracking mud across the hardwood floors that Cole Mercer had refinished with his own hands the summer before his wife got sick. They moved through the house like it was already empty, like Cole and his children were furniture that hadn't been scheduled for pickup yet. "Sir, we have authorization from the estate executor." The lead mover didn't even look up from his clipboard. "You have 40 minutes to remove personal items." Cole stood in the hallway, still in his work clothes, sawdust on his collar. His 8-year-old twins, Emma and Logan, pressed against his legs like they could hold gravity in place just by standing still. 40 minutes to pack up a life. Outside, snow was already falling. If this story hits you somewhere deep, stick with me until the very end. Drop a like and leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's go. The Ashford estate sat at the top of Ridgemont Hill like it had always been there and always would be. Stone and timber and iron gates that never rusted, surrounded by Douglas firs so old they'd forgotten what it felt like to be small. Cole had driven through those gates for the first time 9 years ago with Claire in the passenger seat, her hand warm on his knee, laughing about something he couldn't remember now. He remembered the gates. He remembered her hand. The laugh was gone. He hadn't wanted to move in after the wedding. Claire had insisted, just temporarily, while they figured out their finances. While Cole finished his transition out of the Navy and into something that didn't require him to sleep with one eye open. Victor Ashford had offered the East Wing with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and Cole had told himself it was generosity. It took him 3 years to understand it was a leash. He'd been carrying boxes since 6:30 in the morning, loading the truck himself because he wasn't about to let Victor's hired hands touch Claire's things, her books, her sketch pads, the ceramic mugs she'd collected from every city she'd ever visited, each one wrapped in newspaper and placed into cardboard boxes with more care than Cole had given anything in a long time. Emma had helped for the first hour, solemn and precise, folding newspaper corners with the focused expression that used to make Claire laugh. "She folds paper like a little engineer," Claire had said once. "She gets that from you." Logan had lasted 20 minutes before sitting on the stairs and refusing to move, arms around Ranger's thick neck, face buried in the dog's fur. Cole hadn't pushed it. Some battles weren't worth winning. Ranger was a Belgian Malinois, 72 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, with a chip in his left ear from a door frame in Fallujah, and eyes that tracked everything twice before relaxing. He'd been Cole's MWD, military working dog, for 2 tours, certified in explosive detection and patrol, and when Cole left the Navy, the kennel master had offered to reassign him. Cole had filled out the adoption paperwork before the man finished the sentence. That was 6 years ago. Ranger was 9 now, which was getting old for a Molly, but no one had told him that. He still moved like a threat assessment. He hadn't liked this house since the beginning. Cole had noticed. He'd filed it under dog being a dog and moved on. He was rethinking that now. By 10 o'clock, the movers had shifted from professional to aggressive, carrying furniture out before Cole had cleared the drawers, setting boxes down too hard, exchanging looks that had a whole conversation inside them. Cole clocked it the way he'd once clocked shifting behaviors in Kandahar marketplaces. Peripheral awareness, pattern recognition, threat triangulation. These men weren't movers, or they were movers plus something else. Victor had eyes everywhere in his own house. Cole had learned that the slow way. He was carrying a box of Claire's medical journals. She'd been a nurse practitioner before the diagnosis made working impossible, when he heard the footsteps on the marble staircase. Deliberate. Even. The footsteps of a man who had never once hurried for anything because the world had always waited for him. Cole. He set the box down, turned around. Victor Ashford was 64 years old and looked like he'd been carved from something expensive. Silver hair, broad shoulders that hadn't softened much despite the age, dark wool overcoat that probably cost more than Cole's truck. He had Claire's jaw, the same sharp line of it, and that had always been the cruelest part. Looking at the man who was trying to destroy him and seeing traces of the woman he'd loved. "Victor, I trust the transition is proceeding smoothly." Not a question. Victor's eyes moved past Cole to the half-emptied hallway, assessing damage the way a general assessed a battlefield he'd already won. "Your men are in a hurry." Cole kept his voice flat. He'd learned that tone in the Navy. The voice you used when you were 2 seconds from something you couldn't take back. The estate requires efficient management. Victor clasped his hands behind his back. That's something you've never quite understood, Cole. Efficiency, structure, sustainability. He let each word land separately, like he was reading a verdict. Claire understood those things instinctively. It was one of her finer qualities. Don't. I'm simply observing. Don't talk about her qualities to me. Cole took one step forward. Not aggressive, just closing distance, the way you do when you want someone to hear you without any doubt. Not today. Not in this hallway. Victor didn't flinch. He never flinched. That was the thing about men who'd never been in a real fight. They didn't have the instinct. You have until noon, he said instead. The attorneys have been very clear about the timeline. I know the timeline, and the children are coming with me. A pause. Victor's expression didn't change, which meant it had already changed in ways Cole couldn't see. A shift behind the eyes. A small recalibration. Cole had learned to read that too. Cole. Victor's voice dropped half a register into something that was engineered to sound reasonable. I want you to consider, genuinely consider, whether what you're about to do serves Emma and Logan's best interests. You have a logging job. A logging job. Do you understand what I can provide for them? Schools, opportunities, stability? I have a job. Cole picked up the box. And they have a father. Those two things are going to be enough. He walked past Victor without waiting for the response. He heard it anyway. They won't be. The snow started before noon and didn't stop. Cole loaded the last box at 11:58, which he knew because he'd been checking his watch every 4 minutes like he was back on a timed op, and because the 2 minutes felt important, not giving Victor the satisfaction of seeing him rush. Ranger jumped into the cab without being told, claiming the passenger seat while Emma and Logan buckled in the back, Emma with a book open on her lap that she wasn't reading, and Logan with his face pressed against the window watching the house shrink as they pulled down the driveway. Dad? Emma's voice was careful. She'd been careful with her voice for 3 months ever since the funeral, like she was conserving something. Yeah, Bug. Where are we going? Cole had been asking himself the same question. The apartment in Silver Birch Crossing was 3 weeks from ready. Lease signed, but the previous tenant had left water damage that the landlord swore would be resolved by the 15th, which was a lie Cole recognized but had no leverage to challenge. His brother Marcus lived in Arizona. His closest Navy buddy, Torres, was in San Diego and had offered his couch without hesitation. But San Diego was 18 hours away and Cole wasn't putting his kids through that. Not in a snowstorm, not the week after they'd buried their mother. He'd made one call that morning. An old man named Dwight, who ran the backcountry property registry for the county, and who owed Cole a favor from 3 years ago when Cole had helped pull his truck out of a ditch at 2 a.m. Dwight had given him a name, Pine Hollow Ridge, Eastern Access Road, the old Fenwick hunting cabin. Abandoned since 2019, no lease required if nobody was in it, and nobody was. We're going somewhere quiet, Cole said. Is it far? Little bit. Logan pulled his face from the window. Is it somewhere Ranger will like? Cole glanced at the dog, who was sitting straight-spined and alert, watching the road with professional interest. Yeah, bud. Ranger's gonna love it. He wasn't sure if that was true, but he needed it to be true for the next 45 miles. The road to Pine Hollow Ridge turned to gravel after the county highway, and then to packed dirt that the snow was erasing in real time. Cole's truck, a 2017 F250, one of the few things he owned outright, had four-wheel drive and new chains on the rear tires, and he still felt the back end drift twice through curves where the elevation dropped. He drove with the controlled tension he'd learned navigating vehicles in places where the road could end in ways that weren't on any map. Hands at 9 and 3, eyes reading the surface 300 feet ahead, speed 10 miles below what felt comfortable. The trees closed in around them as they climbed. Lodge poles and Engelmann spruce thick enough to block the worst of the wind, which was picking up now, pressing against the truck's flanks with a low, steady howl. The temperature outside read 11 degrees. Emma had stopped pretending to read. She was watching the trees. Dad, she said, Grandpa Victor said we could come back any time. Cole kept his eyes on the road. Did he say that? He said, she hesitated. He said he was going to make sure we came home. That's what he said. The phrasing landed wrong. Cole ran it back through his head. Make sure we came home. Not we'd always be welcome. Not the door was open. A different construction. A different intent. When did he tell you that? Yesterday, when I was packing. Pause. He came in my room. He brought me hot chocolate. Ranger shifted in his seat. Not much, just a small reorientation, the way he used to when a sector was worth a second look. Cole said, "Okay." He filed it. He didn't ask more questions. He didn't want Emma to know that what she'd just said had activated something in him that hadn't been activated in years. That old combat brain readiness, the state of being where peripheral details stopped being background and started being data. Make sure we came home. Victor Ashford didn't make promises he didn't intend to keep. Cole had figured that out the hard way, too. The Fenwick cabin appeared through the tree line, like something from a dream you couldn't quite hold on to. Dark timber walls, a stone chimney stacked to the roof line, a covered porch that sagged on the left side where one of the support posts had rotted at the base. Snow had piled against the front door almost to the handle. The windows were dark and filmed with ice. Logan stared at it. We're staying here? It's got walls and a roof. It's got one wall. Logan pointed to where a section of exterior siding had come loose and was hanging perpendicular, slapping against the cabin in the wind. That's an easy fix. Cole put the truck in park and studied the structure with a professional eye. The way you looked at a fortified position before you cleared it. Load-bearing walls intact. Chimney looked solid. The porch sag was cosmetic, or close to it. The siding would take an hour and some screws. Come on. Let's see inside before we decide it's a disaster. Dad, I can already decide. Logan. The boy sighed with his whole body. A boneless, theatrical deflation that was so completely clear that Cole had to look away for a second. The door was swollen in its frame from moisture and cold, but it opened with a shoulder hit, the way cabin doors in the mountains always did. Cole went in first, instinct. Clear the room before the others enter. He swept the space with his flashlight, a main room with a cast-iron stove, a small kitchen with a hand-pump sink that probably still worked if the pipe hadn't burst, 2 doorways that opened to a back bedroom and a storage room. Dust everywhere. Mouse evidence in the kitchen corners, a stack of split firewood against the far wall, bone dry, which was the first genuinely good news of the day. Clear, he said, which he hadn't meant to say out loud. Emma pushed past him and walked to the center of the room, turning slowly, taking inventory the same way he did. She was so much like him it sometimes stopped him cold. There's wood, she said. Yeah. And the stove looks okay. I'll check the chimney before we light it. But it could work. Yeah, Bug. It could work. She looked at him with Claire's eyes in Cole's face and said very quietly, Okay, then we make it work. Logan came in behind her with his arms full of backpack and sleeping bag, and the general defeated energy of a child who had already resigned himself to hardship. Ranger came last, trotting past everyone, and immediately began moving through the space in a systematic pattern, nose low, then high, following a grid Cole recognized from clearing operations. Left wall to right, corners, then back to the center. He stopped at a section of the floor near the far wall and started pawing. Not the way dogs pawed at things out of curiosity. A couple of half-hearted scrapes, and then on to something else. This was deliberate, methodical, the same kind of purposeful, fixated engagement he'd shown when he was working, when the scent was real and the hit was live. Ranger. Cole snapped his fingers. Hey, off! Ranger looked up at him with those amber eyes, held his gaze for 2 full seconds, then looked back down at the floor. Cole crouched beside him, ran his hand across the boards. They felt like every other board in the floor. Old, worn, gapped from drying, except for this section, which had a faint hollow sound when he rapped his knuckle against it. He told himself it was a crawl space, air pocket beneath the subfloor. Nothing. Come on, he said. Let's set up before we lose the light. Ranger stepped back, but he didn't leave that corner. He circled and lay down facing it, chin on his paws, watching. Cole stood, filed it, and went to check the chimney. That first night was one of the harder ones, and Cole had a long list of hard nights to compare it against. The stove worked. Once he'd cleared a bird's nest from the chimney flue, and repacked the seal with a strip of metal tape from his kit. Heat filled the room slowly, grudgingly, like it was trying to decide whether the effort was worth it. Cole had sleeping bags rated to -15, camp pads, and a propane burner for cooking. He wasn't reckless, just broke. He made soup from cans and instant rice, which Logan ate without complaint because apparently the cold had lowered his standards, and Emma ate methodically, the way she did everything. They talked some. Not much. The silence in the cabin wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't terrible either. It was the kind of silence that's just people breathing in the same space, learning the sound of each other without all the usual noise around it. Cole told them a little bit about the cabin, the history he'd gotten from Dwight, who said it had belonged to a hunter and surveyor named Amos Fenwick, used Summers for 30 years, abandoned when Amos's family sold the land to a timber holding company that never did anything with it. "Does anyone own it?" Logan asked. "Holding company." "So are we like trespassing?" "We are not having that conversation." Logan almost smiled. Almost. Ranger slept in the corner he'd chosen, the one beside that section of floor. Cole lay in his bag staring at the ceiling beams and listening to the wind outside, cataloging it by force and direction the way you catalog terrain features. Knowing your environment was always the first step. The storm was moving northeast. Probably lose another 4 to 6 hours of heavy snow, then taper. Road would be passable by morning if he took it slow. He thought about Victor's face in the hallway. He thought about what Emma had said. "Make sure we came home." At some point before 3 a.m., Cole finally slept. The shallow, maintained sleep of a man who'd spent years in environments where sleeping too hard was a liability. He didn't dream. He never dreamed anymore, which used to bother him, until Claire told him it meant his brain was working correctly, processing in real time. He'd believed her because she was a medical professional and because she was Claire. That was the thing about grief he'd found. It didn't announce itself. It just sat in the ordinary things. The way he still automatically stored information as things to tell Claire and then had nowhere to deliver it. Little files piling up with nowhere to go. He heard Ranger stand up at 4:51. Not the way a dog wakes up and stretches and settles. The way a trained working dog comes to attention when the threat level changes. Cole was upright and moving before his conscious brain had finished the sentence. Hand finding the flashlight on instinct. The same hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there because he wasn't in the Navy anymore, and he wasn't in Kandahar, and this was a cabin in Montana, except the front porch creaked. Not the wind. The wind had a different sound, distributed weight, structural stress across the whole surface. This was focused, concentrated. The sound of something with a specific mass in a specific location. Cole moved to the window, flashlight off, and looked out through the frost-filmed glass into the dark. The porch was empty, but at the edge of the tree line, maybe 40 meters out, just at the limit of visibility, he caught it. A shape that wasn't a tree, still enough to be a tree, but not quite the right geometry. He watched it for 60 seconds. It didn't move. When he looked back, it was gone. He stood at that window until gray light started filtering through the storm clouds, and then he went and checked on the kids, and then he stood in the main room with his flashlight aimed at the section of floor Ranger had been fixated on, and he thought about what it meant that someone was watching a cabin they hadn't been in for 6 hours. Nobody could know they were here. He hadn't told anyone except Dwight, and Dwight had no reason to. Victor Ashford had eyes everywhere. Cole turned off the flashlight and sat in the dark and breathed. "Okay," he told himself, "okay. Start from the beginning. What do you actually know?" He knew they'd been forced out. He knew Victor had spoken to Emma privately, had made a promise that sounded less like comfort and more like a plan. He knew someone had been on the porch at 4:51 in the morning in a blizzard at a cabin that wasn't on any obvious registry. And he knew his dog, a certified, combat-tested military working dog, had been fixated on a section of floor since the moment they walked in. Cole had learned a long time ago, in places far more dangerous than rural Montana, that when three things that seem unrelated start pointing in the same direction, it's time to stop calling them unrelated. He got up. He got his multi-tool. And he crouched beside the section of floor Ranger had been pawing at, and he started prying up the boards. The boards came up easier than they should have. That was the first sign. The nails weren't rusted through like the rest of the subfloor. They were just placed, friction fit, the way you'd set them if you needed them to come back up. Cole had done enough field work to recognize a constructed concealment when he was looking at one. He pulled 3 boards before he found it. The lockbox was military-grade, matte black, OD green rubber seals on every edge, the kind of waterproof, shockproof container used for sensitive documents and field intelligence. It was roughly the size of a hard-shell laptop case and had 2 combination locks on the front, both 3-digit. Cole sat back on his heels and stared at it. Ranger put his chin on the edge of the hole. "Yeah," Cole said quietly. "I see it." He should have waited for daylight. He should have woken the kids up and fed them first. He should have done a threat assessment on the perimeter instead of sitting cross-legged on the floor of an abandoned cabin at 5 in the morning, staring at a box he didn't know how to open. He tried 111 on the first lock. Nothing. He tried the last 4 digits of his service number split across both locks. Nothing. He sat there for a moment, breathing slow, and then he tried something he hadn't planned on trying. Something almost too simple to be the answer, which was why it was the answer. He tried Claire's birthday. Month and day on the first lock. Year on the second. Both locks opened at the same time with a sound like a small, definitive exhale. Cole opened the box. Inside, nested in foam cut precisely to their shapes, were 3 sealed legal envelopes, 1 manila envelope thick with what felt like photographs, a USB drive in a waterproof bag, and a handwritten letter in an unsealed envelope with Cole's name on the front in handwriting. He would have recognized anywhere on Earth because he'd been reading it for 9 years on grocery lists and birthday cards and sticky notes left on bathroom mirrors. Claire. He picked up the letter carefully, the way you handle something that you know is going to change things. His hands were steady. Years of training had given him hands that stayed steady even when everything else was moving. But his chest was doing something complicated that he didn't have language for. He unfolded it. "Cole, if you're reading this, then he did what I always knew he would do. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're in that cabin in the cold, and I'm not there, and the kids are with you, and you're scared in that way you never let anyone see. I know you. I know exactly which version of scared this is, and I hate that I'm not there to tell you to your face that it's going to be okay. But it is. I promise you it's going to be okay, because I planned for this. Don't open the other envelopes yet. Take the USB drive in the manila envelope. In the morning, drive to Silver Birch Crossing. The main street, Birch Avenue. There's an office above the hardware store. Graham Ellis, attorney. He's been waiting to hear from you. He knows everything. He's been waiting for 18 months. Tell him I sent you. Tell him you found the box. And Cole, listen to Ranger. He found it before you did. He always did. I love you. I love you so much it made me build contingency plans for my hospital bed because I couldn't stand the thought of him winning." Claire Cole folded the letter. He sat in the dark cabin with the wind outside and his children asleep in the next room and his dog watching him with amber eyes, and he did not cry. He wanted to. The pressure was real and enormous and had nowhere to go. But he'd learned, badly through repetition, that some grief needed to wait for the right moment. And this was not the right moment, because there was a threat on the perimeter that he hadn't cleared, and there were 2 kids asleep 10 feet away who needed their father to be functional. He held the letter in both hands for 60 seconds. Then he put it back in the envelope, closed the box, and replaced the boards. In the morning. He would go in the morning. Morning came gray and exhausted, like it hadn't slept either. The snow had tapered around 6 and stopped entirely by 7, leaving the ridge under 14 fresh inches that sparkled brutally in the thin winter light. Cole made instant oatmeal on the propane burner, brown sugar and dried cranberries, Emma's preferred combination, Logan's tolerated one, and watched the tree line through the kitchen window while he ate standing up. There were tracks. He'd gone out at first light to check, telling the kids he was assessing the road, which was true and also not the whole truth. He'd done a wide perimeter loop in snowshoes, the way he used to do camp security in the field, reading sign. The tracks came from the Southeast Access Trail, size 11 or 12 boots, and they circled the cabin at a distance of about 30 meters before stopping at a gap in the tree line that had a direct sight line to the front windows. From there, the tracks doubled back and went down the same trail they'd come from. Whoever it was had been watching for somewhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours, based on the depth of the footprint compression in the layered snow. They'd left before dawn, which meant they'd been in position during the night, which meant they weren't opportunistic. They were organized. Cole had eaten his oatmeal with that information living in his chest, right beside Claire's letter, and decided that moving fast was now more important than moving carefully. He needed to get to Silver Birch Crossing. He needed to find Graham Ellis. He needed to understand what Claire had built before Victor figured out it existed. "We're taking a drive this morning," he told the kids at breakfast. Logan looked up from his bowl. "Where?" "Town. I need to check something." "What about the cabin?" "Cabin's not going anywhere." "That's kind of the problem," Logan muttered. Emma was watching her father with her radar dish attention, the way she always watched him when she thought something was happening that she wasn't being told about. She had Claire's clinical instincts. Sometimes it was wonderful. Right now, it was slightly inconvenient. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Working on it," Cole said. "Finish your oatmeal." He locked the cabin. Not that the lock would stop anyone who wanted in, but it was better than nothing, and loaded the kids and Ranger into the truck. Before he got in himself, he did a quick check of the vehicle, underneath for anything attached, wheel wells, exhaust pipe. Fast, efficient, probably looked insane from the outside. He didn't care. The truck was clean. He drove. The road down from Pine Hollow Ridge took 22 careful minutes in the fresh snow, and then they were on the county highway, and he could breathe slightly more normally. Silver Birch Crossing was another 18 miles east, a small mountain town built around the timber economy and a ski resort that had seen better decades. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers were logged by category before they finished parking. Cole had been through it twice, once buying chainsaw parts and once when a logging job ran long, and he'd grabbed food at the diner on the main street. The hardware store was called Packard's. He found it on Birch Avenue, the kind of place that had been there since before the surrounding buildings were built, with a hand-painted sign that had faded to something more impressionist than legible. There was a staircase on the outside of the building, running up the side wall to a door on the second floor. Beside the door, a small placard, Ellis and Associates, by appointment. Cole sat in the truck for a moment. "Tell him I sent you." He looked at Emma and Logan. "You two stay here. Ranger stays with you. Don't get out of the truck." Logan sat up. "Why can't we?" "I need 5 minutes to check something out. Then we'll get breakfast somewhere warm." "Deal?" "What kind of breakfast?" Logan asked, which was its own kind of answer. "The pancake kind." "Deal." Cole got out and went up the stairs. The door opened before he knocked. The man on the other side was somewhere between 60 and 70, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a coffee mug in one hand, and the generally organized appearance of someone who'd been waiting for something for a long time and had kept himself busy by being ready. Medium height, trim build, corduroy jacket, eyes that assessed Cole's whole silhouette in about 2 seconds flat and then softened. "Mr. Mercer," Graham Ellis said, and his voice had a quality Cole recognized from people who spent a lot of time with things that mattered. Careful, measured, but not cold. "Come in. I've been expecting you for quite some time." Cole stepped inside. The office was what he'd expected, and also nothing like what he'd expected. Small, warm, floor to ceiling with files and binders and stacked documents. A wide desk covered in organized piles, and against one wall, a corkboard with a timeline of dates and names that Cole started scanning automatically, the way he scanned everything. He caught his name. He caught Victor's name. He caught Claire's. He caught the number $200 million. Cole stopped moving. Ellis set his mug down on the desk and pulled his glasses off his forehead and folded his hands and said the words that Claire had apparently spent 18 months preparing him to say. "Your wife was a great deal more careful than her father ever gave her credit for," he began, "and far more strategic than anyone in that family, including Victor, ever suspected. What I'm about to tell you is going to change the nature of everything that's happened to you and your children. I need you to sit down, Mr. Mercer, and I need you to not say anything until I'm finished, because what I have to tell you took me the better part of 2 years to build, and I'd like to get through it cleanly." Cole sat down. Outside the window of the second-floor office, the main street of Silver Birch Crossing moved in its slow winter rhythm. 2 women talking outside the bakery, a snowplow making its second pass, an old man walking a retriever, and at the far end of the block, just pulling to the curb and sitting there with its engine running, a black SUV. Cole had already seen it, had clocked it before he sat down. had noted the angle set direct sightline to the office door. He turned back to Ellis. "Tell me everything," he said. Ellis opened the first file folder, and outside, slowly, the black SUV rolled forward, just a few feet, just enough to find a better angle, just enough to make sure they knew where Cole Mercer was sitting. Graham Ellis didn't open the file folder the way lawyers open files in movies, with drama, with ceremony, with the slow revelation of something meant to impress. He opened it the way a surgeon opened a chest, efficiently, with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this many times and understood that speed was a form of respect. "Claire came to me 19 months ago," he said. "March, 2 years before she passed. She'd already received the second diagnosis. She knew the timeline." He set 3 documents on the desk between them, side by side, and turned them so Cole could read. "She didn't come in crying. She didn't come in angry. She sat in that chair you're sitting in right now, and she said, 'I need to build something my husband can't see yet, because if he knows it exists, he'll try to protect it, and protecting it will get him killed.'" Cole stared at the documents without reading them. "She knew your instincts," Ellis said. "She knew you'd get in front of it. She didn't want you in front of it until the time was right. The time being now, yes." Cole pulled the closest document toward him. It was a trust instrument, the kind of dense, multi-page legal architecture that took years and serious money to build. His eyes found the key numbers first, the way they always found key numbers. And what he found stopped his breath for a moment, the same way a step that wasn't there stopped your foot mid-stride. $212 million. The number sat there on the page, clean and factual, completely indifferent to the size of itself. "Where did this come from?" Cole said. It wasn't a question. Or it was, but it wasn't the kind that needed a question mark. Ellis leaned back in his chair. "Claire's maternal grandmother, Edna Whitmore. You probably never heard the name. Claire didn't talk about her because Victor worked very hard to make sure the Whitmore side of the family was kept at a distance. Edna died in 2017 and left her entire estate, including a substantial private holding in commercial real estate across 4 states, exclusively to Claire. Bypassed Victor completely. Bypassed the Ashford family trust completely." He paused. "Victor tried to contest the will for 8 months. He lost. But what he did manage to do was ensure that the settlement terms were sealed, the holdings were restructured under a blind trust, and Claire's name was kept off everything visible." Another pause. He thought he'd neutralized it. He thought he'd taken the teeth out of it. He didn't. Claire didn't let him. She found me through Edna's original estate attorney, a man named Furlow, retired now. And she spent the better part of the last 18 months of her life restructuring everything in a way that Victor can't touch. Ellis tapped the file. "The trust has a specific activation condition. It doesn't transfer to you or the children automatically. It activates only upon documented evidence of Victor Ashford attempting to gain custodial control of Emma and Logan Mercer following Claire's death." Cole was very still. "She predicted it," he said, "down to the custody language, yes." The office ticked around them. The old clock on the wall, the radiator working against the cold coming through the window frame, the sound of the street below doing its ordinary morning business. Cole sat with the weight of it. Not the money. The money was almost abstract, a number too large to feel real yet. What landed was something else. The image of Claire in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm and a laptop open, building legal architecture to catch a man she knew was going to move against her family the moment she wasn't there to stop him. Building it while she was dying, making sure every piece was in place so that Cole wouldn't have to fight blind. He thought he was protecting her. She'd been protecting him the entire time. "The surveillance," Cole said. "She mentioned surveillance in her letter." Ellis opened the manila envelope and spread a series of photographs across the desk. They were time-stamped, high resolution, clearly taken with professional equipment, not phone cameras. Cole recognized Victor in several of them. In others, he recognized Victor's personal attorney, a wiry man named Caldwell, who always wore bow ties and had the general moral architecture of a parking meter. There were photographs of meetings Cole had never known about, documents being exchanged. A photograph that appeared to show Victor meeting with a man Cole didn't recognize in a parking structure in what looked like Bozeman. "Who's that?" Cole pointed. "Trace Varden, formerly with the Montana Department of Family Services, Before he left under circumstances the department was very reluctant to discuss publicly. Ellis pulled out a separate sheet. He's been retained by Victor as a private consultant. His specialty, before he left state employment, was emergency custody assessments. The pieces didn't so much click together as they did arrive simultaneously, the way pattern recognition worked when you'd been trained to run it fast. All the pieces visible at once, and the picture assembling itself without requiring conscious direction. Victor wasn't just planning to contest custody through the courts. He was building a case. A documented, official-looking case that Cole was unfit, that Cole was unstable, that Cole was a broken veteran with no income and no fixed address and a history of what? He didn't know what they had or what they were building, but he understood the direction. He's going to say I'm a danger to my children, Cole said. Ellis met his eyes. He's going to try. And Varden gives him the official scaffolding to hang that on. That's the architecture, yes. Cole stared at the photo of Varden for a moment. Then he stacked the photographs carefully, the way you handled intelligence documents, and set them back in the envelope. What do I need to do? Right now? Nothing that looks like you know what's coming. You need to establish residency, maintain stable employment, and keep the children in a consistent routine. The trust is real and the documentation is solid, but Victor's first move will be to destabilize you publicly before any of this reaches a courtroom. If you look reactive, if you look like a man who's panicking, it plays into the narrative he's building. Ellis picked up his pen, held it without using it. But I do need you to be careful. The cabin, is it registered anywhere? No. Good. Keep it that way for now. I'm going to file some preliminary documents this week that will establish a paper trail on our side, quiet ones. Nothing that tips our hand. He paused. Is there anything that happened in the last 24 hours I should know about? Cole looked at the window. The black SUV was still there, hadn't moved. Somebody was watching the cabin last night, he said. On foot. In a blizzard. Ellis followed his gaze to the window. His expression shifted, just slightly, the way expressions shifted when something confirmed a fear that had been theoretical until now. They found you that fast. Victor said he was going to bring the kids home. Cole stood up slowly. He told Emma that yesterday. He told an 8-year-old, he told her directly, privately. Cole picked up the USB drive in its waterproof bag. What's on this? Audio recordings. Claire made them over several months. Conversations with Victor, conversations with Caldwell, 2 that she had recorded with Varden before she understood what his role was going to be. They document a pattern of control and coercion going back at least 6 years. Ellis stood as well. They're admissible. I've had them reviewed. Cole pocketed the drive. I need to get back to my kids. Of course. Ellis extended his hand. Mr. Mercer, I want you to understand something. Your wife chose me because I'm not the kind of attorney who loses. I don't say that with arrogance. I say it because she needed to hear it when she sat in that chair, and I imagine you need to hear it now. A pause. She built you a very strong fortress. My job is to help you understand the doors. Cole shook his hand. She always was better at the long game than me. From what I could tell, Ellis said, she was better at most things, but she seemed to think you had qualities she couldn't build into a legal document. Cole didn't ask which qualities. He thought he knew. He also thought he was probably wrong about which ones she meant, because he always was. He went back down the stairs. The black SUV pulled out of its parking space as he hit the bottom step, rolling slowly north on Birch Avenue, neither hurrying nor pretending to be casual about it. The driver was a shape behind tinted glass, unreadable, which was the point. Cole watched it go with both hands in his jacket pockets and his face doing nothing in particular. He walked back to the truck. Logan had his face pressed to the window again. Ranger was in the back seat. Emma was watching Cole's face the moment he opened the door, doing that thing she did where she read people before they had a chance to decide what to show. Pancakes, Cole said. I found a place on the main street. Let's go. That's not all you found, Emma said. Cole started the truck. No, but pancakes first. She accepted that. She always did. Not because she didn't push, but because she knew the difference between information being withheld and information being timed. She'd learned that from her mother. Claire had always said that knowing when to push was more useful than pushing all the time. Logan, for his part, was already scanning the street for the diner sign. Cole drove them to breakfast and ate eggs he didn't taste, and listened to Logan explain in considerable detail the structural deficiencies of the cabin, and thought about a woman who'd spent the last year of her life in a hospital bed building a fortress for people she wasn't going to be around to live in. He thought about the SUV. He thought about Trace Varden. He ordered a second coffee and drank half of it and left the rest, because the day was going to be long, and he needed to be sharp, not wired. They drove back to Pine Hollow Ridge in a silence that felt somehow slightly less heavy than the silence that had driven them away from it. The logging job was with a company called Harwick Timber. Small operation, 12 guys, mostly seasonal, cutting contracts on private land in the lower valley. Cole had gotten it through a crew boss named Dale Sutton, who'd served in the Army and had a general policy of hiring veterans first and asking questions second. The pay was hourly, not spectacular, but it was cash in hand, and Dale didn't require a fixed address on the employment form, which Cole suspected was intentional. He started Monday, 3 days after the cabin. The work was physical in a way that was familiar, not the same as carrying a ruck through elevation gain in body armor, but the same category of physical, the kind that required your full attention and punished inattention in ways that were immediate and concrete. A chainsaw at 3,000 revolutions per minute didn't care that you were tired or distracted or operating on less sleep than was medically advisable. The trees didn't care. The terrain didn't care. Cole found that clarifying. The crew was the kind of crew you found in mountain towns. Weathered, competent, not particularly interested in personal history, which suited everyone involved. A guy named Breckett, who'd been doing this for 22 years and had the grip strength to prove it. Two brothers, Lyle and Jonah Watts, who communicated in a shared shorthand that Cole had stopped trying to decode. A kid named Prescott, maybe 23, who'd come up from Billings and had the slightly dazed expression of someone still adjusting to work that required them to be outside. Dale ran the operation the way good NCOs ran their units. Clear expectations, no tolerance for sloppiness around equipment, and a general management philosophy that if you did your work, nobody would bother you about anything else. Cole appreciated it. He drove up from the cabin each morning at 5:45, got back around 6:30 in the evening, made dinner, helped Logan with the schoolwork they were doing remotely while the enrollment paperwork processed, and sat with Emma in the evenings while she read or sketched in the margins of notebooks the way Claire used to sketch in the margins of everything. The normal rhythm of it helped. He wasn't sure it was sustainable, but it helped. Ranger kept watch. Cole had started paying attention to Ranger's behavior the way he should have been paying attention to it from the beginning, not treating it as ambient background, but reading it as data. The dog was calm during the day mostly. He patrolled the perimeter of the cabin clearing in patterns that Cole recognized as a modified version of what Cole himself did during security sweeps. Systematic, overlapping, leaving no blind spots. In the evenings, he was relaxed enough. But twice in the first week, at intervals that didn't correspond to weather or animal movement or any obvious stimulus, he went to the window facing the southeast trail and stood there without moving. The second time, Cole went out with a flashlight and did a wide loop in the dark and found nothing. No tracks. No disturbed snow. He went back inside and stood at that window for 40 minutes anyway. Nothing came. But the absence of a thing wasn't the same as the thing not existing. He'd learned that in rooms he didn't talk about in places he didn't name. The absence of contact just meant they were being patient. Victor Ashford could afford to be patient. Cole had considered telling Dale about the situation. Some version of it, sanitized, enough to explain why he might be distracted or why he might occasionally need to leave early. He'd decided against it, not because he didn't trust Dale, but because every additional person who held a piece of the picture was an additional variable. He'd kept his team small in the field. He kept it small now. The exception was Ellis, who called him Thursday of the first week on the burner phone Cole had purchased at the gas station in town. "I filed the preliminary documentation this morning," Ellis said, quietly. "But I want you to know that Caldwell's office made 2 calls to the county courthouse in the last 48 hours. Procedural inquiries about the custody filing process." Cole was sitting in the truck in the Harwick timber yard eating a sandwich. He put it down. "How fast?" "Faster than I'd expected. Victor's moving the timeline up." A pause. There's something else. A woman named Doris Hatch from the County Social Services Office is going to call you this week. Routine welfare check, according to the notice. It's not routine. Varden. Almost certainly. The request was filed through an unofficial channel that I'm still tracing. What I need you to do is let her come. Don't refuse, don't delay, don't do anything that reads as resistant. Let her see the cabin, let her meet the children, answer her questions straight. The cabin's not impressive. No, but it's functional and it's clean, and the children are fed and doing schoolwork. Those are the things that matter in an initial assessment. Ellis paused again. Cole, how are the kids? He looked through the windshield at the tree line beyond the timber yard. How were the kids? Emma was reading at a grade level 3 years above her actual grade and drawing architectural floor plans of a better cabin in the margins of her notebooks. Logan had learned the names of every bird at the feeder Cole had set up on the porch, which he seemed to have decided was a reasonable form of protest against the cabin's other limitations. They're okay, Cole said. They're better than they should be. That's something. Yeah. He ended the call and ate the rest of his sandwich without tasting it. Doris Hatch called Friday afternoon, just as Ellis had said. She had a pleasant professional voice and phrasing that was carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that takes training to maintain. Cole scheduled her for Monday morning and spent the weekend fixing everything that could be fixed in 48 hours. The hanging siding, a section of porch railing that wobbled, a gap under the kitchen door where cold air came through. He couldn't make the cabin look like the Ashford estate. He wasn't trying to. He was trying to make it look like what it was. A man doing the best he could with what he had. Emma helped without being asked. She scrubbed the kitchen surfaces with a ferocity that was partly about cleanliness and partly, Cole suspected, about having something to do with her hands. Logan sanded the rough edges off the repaired porch boards. Ranger supervised everything. On Sunday night, Cole sat on the repaired porch in the cold and looked at the tree line and thought about the SUV and thought about Varden and thought about the recordings on the USB drive and thought about Claire saying I couldn't stand the thought of him winning, and the wind came through the pines with a sound like breathing. His phone, the regular one, buzzed. He looked at it. The text was from a number he didn't recognize. No name, no context, just 11 words. She knew more than you think. Stop before it costs you. Cole stared at it for a long time. Then he went inside, locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down everything he knew, everything he suspected, and everything he still didn't understand, the way he used to do pre-mission intelligence summaries. 2 columns, confirmed and unconfirmed, connected by lines that showed relationships. The picture that emerged was incomplete, but the shape of it was visible. Victor wasn't just trying to take the children. He was trying to take them before whatever Claire had built could be activated, which meant either Victor knew about the trust, or he knew that something existed, even if he didn't know what, and he was racing to neutralize Cole before Cole could find out what it was. The text message complicated that. She knew more than you think could mean anything. It could be Victor's people trying to rattle him. It could be someone else entirely, someone who knew about Claire's preparations and had their own interest in what happened next. Cole wrote the number down in the confirmed column and drew a line to the unconfirmed column with a question mark. Then he went to bed. He lay in the dark for a while, and the cabin groaned in the wind, and Ranger's breathing was steady from the corner he'd claimed, and down the short hallway, Emma and Logan were asleep in the back bedroom with the old quilt Cole had found in the storage room that smelled like cedar and someone else's history. He thought, she built me a fortress. He thought, I don't know all the doors yet. He thought, that has to be enough for tonight. Then the south tree line lit up. Not much, just for a second, a brief white glow that swept through the pines and was gone, the kind of light you got from a torch or a powerful flashlight, moving fast between the trees. Cole was out of the sleeping bag and at the window before the thought had finished forming. Nothing. Dark tree line. Still air. Snow undisturbed in the clearing. He stayed at the window for 10 minutes. Then he heard it, very faint, barely above the ambient sound of the mountain at night, the sound of an engine, idling somewhere down the access road. Not moving, just sitting, waiting. Cole pulled on his boots and his jacket and went quietly to the front door and stood with his hand on the latch, running the geometry. Front door opened to the porch, and the clearing exposed. The back door opened to the woodpile and the tree line on the north side, which was the side they weren't on. If he went out the back and made a wide loop south, he could come up behind the access road from uphill, which gave him elevation and cover. He thought about the kids. He thought about leaving the kids alone in the cabin while he went outside to investigate a possible threat, and everything in him rejected it. He let go of the latch. He went back to the window and watched. The engine sound faded after another 3 minutes, gradually moving away down the road until it disappeared into the mountain silence. Cole stayed at the window until his feet were cold in his boots. Then he went to Emma's door and cracked it open and listened to her breathing, even, slow, asleep. He pulled the door closed and went back to his sleeping bag and lay down with his eyes open. His phone was on the floor beside him. He picked it up and looked at the unknown number's message again. She knew more than you think. Stop before it costs you. He put the phone down. He picked up the notebook and added one line to the unconfirmed column. Someone else knows about the box. Then he put the notebook down too and lay in the dark and listened to the mountain and waited for morning with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that the period before contact is never as long as you want it to be. He was right. Monday came cold and clear. The sky above the ridge the specific shade of blue that only happened in winter at elevation, sharp and indifferent. Doris Hatch arrived at 9 o'clock in a county-marked sedan on time, which Cole appreciated. She was a heavy-set woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a canvas tote bag and the kind of deliberate pleasantness that could go either way, genuine or professional, and it wasn't always possible to tell from the outside which one you were dealing with. Cole made coffee. Emma showed Doris her schoolwork notebook without being asked. Logan introduced her to the bird feeder in the way that only Logan could, which was thorough, taxonomically specific, and slightly relentless, and Cole watched Doris Hatch's deliberately neutral expression develop a small involuntary smile at the edges and decided she was probably genuine. She walked through the cabin. She asked Cole standard questions: income, stability of employment, healthcare arrangements, school enrollment status. He answered every one directly without elaborating more than necessary. He showed her the sleeping arrangement, the food supply, the woodpile, the propane tank. She made notes. She nodded at things. She didn't share her impressions, which was professional and slightly maddening. At the end, standing in the main room with her tote over her shoulder, she said, "Mr. Mercer, I have to be straightforward with you. This assessment was requested through an unofficial channel that gave us some pause internally." Cole held his coffee mug and waited. "We're required to respond to all requests," she continued, "regardless of the channel, so I'm here. But I want you to know that what I've seen today is a functional home and 2 children who are clearly engaged and cared for." She paused. "I'll be filing my report this afternoon." "I appreciate that." She nodded, started for the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. "Mr. Mercer, are you aware of any ongoing concerns regarding the children's safety? From anyone outside this household?" Cole looked at her, measured the question, measured her. "Yes," he said. "Then I'd suggest you speak to an attorney if you haven't already." She held his gaze for a moment. "For what it's worth." She left. Cole stood in the doorway and watched the county sedan back down the access road and disappear, and felt something in his chest unclench by about a third. Not enough to call relief, but enough to call a small shift. He turned around. Emma was standing in the middle of the room, arms crossed, in her father's posture exactly. "She was sent by Grandpa Victor," she said. It wasn't a question. Cole set his mug down on the counter. "What makes you say that?" "Because when I showed her my schoolwork, she kept asking if we talked to anyone on the phone. If you talked to anyone. If a man named—" She paused, her brow furrowing slightly. "Varden had ever visited." Cole went very still. "She asked you about Varden." "She said a man named Varden," and then she kind of stopped herself and moved on to a different question. Emma uncrossed her arms. "I didn't answer. I just showed her more of my math." Cole looked at his daughter, 8 years old, sharp as a tack, with her mother's instincts and his training running underneath them like load-bearing steel, and felt something he couldn't name and didn't try to. "Good call," he said. "Dad." Her voice was careful again, that careful voice she'd been using since March. How bad is it? He wanted to tell her it was fine. He wanted to give her the parent version answer, the one that managed the information into something softer. He'd tried that in the first weeks after Claire died, and Emma had looked at him with those eyes, and he'd understood that managing information with Emma was a form of disrespect she wouldn't tolerate. It's manageable, he said. That's the honest answer. Is someone going to try to take us away from you? Someone's going to try. The room was quiet. Outside, Logan was talking to Ranger in the yard, explaining something about woodpeckers. Okay, Emma said finally. Then we don't let them. Cole nodded. Yeah, that's the plan. She went back to her notebook. Cole stood at the window and looked at the driveway. The tire tracks from Doris Hatch's sedan were clear in the packed snow, twin parallel lines heading down the access road, and beside them, overlapping, was a second set of tracks. Wider wheelbase, deeper tread. The black SUV had been on the access road while Doris Hatch was inside the cabin. Watching to see if the assessment produced anything they could use, Cole stared at those tracks for a long time. Then he picked up the burner phone and called Ellis. They had someone on the road during the welfare check, Cole said when Ellis picked up. And there was a text last night from an unknown number, said she knew more than I think, and told me to stop. A silence on Ellis's end that had weight in it. Read me the exact words. Cole read them. Another silence. Cole, Ellis said, and his voice had something in it now that hadn't been there in the office. Not panic, but a recalibration. The sound of a man updating his threat assessment. I need to make a call this afternoon. There's a possibility that the unknown number isn't from Victor's people. He stopped. There's a name in the files Claire gave me. Someone who was inside Victor's operation for a period of time and who Claire believed might, under the right circumstances, be willing to provide additional information. An informant. More of a conscience with a survival instinct. Another pause. I don't want to say more until I've made the call. What I need from you is patience for 24 hours. I can do that. And Cole, don't respond to the text. Already didn't. Good. That was the right call. A beat. She would have said the same thing. Cole wasn't sure if that was meant as comfort. Either way, he took it as information. Ellis had known Claire well enough to know how she thought, which meant Ellis had been her confidant for a long time, which meant there might be things in that relationship that weren't in the files yet. He filed it. He ended the call. The afternoon moved past in the ordinary rhythm. Wood split, food made, Logan eventually coming in with the very specific energy of a child who had decided the outdoor portion of his protest was complete. Emma read. Cole fixed a hinge on the storage room door that had been pulling loose. Normal, functional. A family doing what families did. And underneath it, the quiet architecture of something much larger than a cabin in the mountains, something Claire had spent her last months constructing, was beginning to make sounds. Not loud ones, not yet. Just the sound of weight settling into the joints, the way a building sounds when it's learning to bear what it was built to carry. Cole went to bed at 10. At 11:47, the power went out. Not a flicker, not a surge. A clean, total cut, the kind that didn't happen by accident in calm weather when no storm was due and the lines had been fine all day. The kind that had a reason. Cole was awake before the last light died because some part of him had never stopped listening, and he lay in the dark for exactly 3 seconds before he got up, and the first thing he heard was Ranger. Not barking, not growling, but making a sound Cole had only heard from him twice before, in 2 separate locations on the other side of the world. A low, sustained vocalization. Not alarm. Warning. Cole was already moving through the dark. No flashlight. Flashlight made you a target, defined your position before you'd defined theirs. He moved by memory, which was good, because he'd spent the first 3 days in this cabin learning the floor plan the way he'd learned every structure he'd ever operated in. Door frames, furniture corners, the exact number of steps between his sleeping bag and the front window, between the front window and the back door. 11 steps, 7 steps. Muscle memory didn't need light. He reached the front window and went low, below the sill, and came up at the corner edge. Minimum exposure, maximum sight angle. The way you cleared a window in a structure you weren't sure about. He looked out. The clearing was dark, but not completely dark. There was no moon, but there was snow, and snow at elevation held ambient light in a way that gave you maybe 15% visibility past the clearing edge. Enough. His eyes adjusted in the way they always adjusted, fast, pulling in whatever was available, reclassifying shadows into shapes. He counted 3 shapes that weren't trees, 2 at the south tree line spaced about 8 meters apart, 1 at the access road end of the clearing, standing still, positioned to watch the front door. They weren't moving. They were waiting for something, waiting for a signal, or for a time, or for a sound that hadn't happened yet. Cole pulled back from the window. He went to the kids' room in 7 steps and opened the door without sound. Both of them were awake. He could tell by the quality of the breathing, the particular stillness of children who've learned that being awake is sometimes something you don't announce. "Dad?" Logan's voice, barely a sound. "Yeah." He crouched between the beds. "I need you both to listen very carefully and do exactly what I say without asking questions. Can you do that?" A pause. Then Emma. "Yes. There are people outside. I don't know what they want yet, but I'm not waiting to find out. You're going to put your boots on and your coats on right now, and you're going to stay low and stay close to me." "How many people?" Emma asked. "3 that I can see." "Ranger?" As if in answer, Ranger appeared in the doorway, pressing against Cole's leg, still making that low sound, still not barking. A working dog knew when silence was the mission. "He's here," Cole said. "Boots. Now." He went back to the main room while they dressed and did what he should have done 3 days ago and hadn't done because he'd been managing too many variables at once and had let logistics crowd out security. He moved the kitchen table 6 inches left, which gave him a clear line from the back door to the main room without visual obstruction. He unlocked the back door and cracked it. Cold air, pine, quiet, and checked the north side of the clearing. Empty. The angle they were watching was the front. The back was their blind side, either because they were sloppy or because they'd decided 3 people at the front was sufficient. Cole had spent a lot of time in places where sufficient was the thing that got people killed. Emma and Logan came into the main room in their coats and boots, moving quietly in the dark. Cole took Emma's hand, put Logan's hand on Emma's coat back, the hand-to-shoulder chain he'd read about in a civilian emergency training manual and had adapted from the buddy system his unit used for low-visibility movement. Ranger pressed against Cole's right leg. "We're going out the back," Cole said quietly. "We're going to the truck, which is on the north side. We stay close to the cabin wall until we reach the corner, then we move straight to the truck. Fast and quiet. Don't stop for anything." "What about our stuff?" Logan whispered. "We come back for stuff." "Ranger's food is—" "Logan." Cole's voice still quiet, but with a quality that ended discussions. "Later." He opened the back door the rest of the way and went through first. 3 seconds of exposure to confirm the north side was clear, then waved them through. The cold hit them all at once, 11 degrees, maybe 12, wind out of the northwest cutting across the clearing. Emma made a small, involuntary sound and suppressed it. Logan put his head down and followed without a word. The cabin's north wall was rough timber, cold through Cole's palm as he kept one hand on it and moved them toward the northeast corner where the truck was parked. 40 feet, 30. The snow was packed enough here that their boots didn't crunch much. Careful steps, weight distributed, the way you moved when you needed to not be heard. 20 feet. Ranger stopped. He stopped so abruptly that Cole nearly stumbled over him, and the dog's body changed, went rigid, nose elevated. The full attention posture that Cole knew meant the threat had changed location. Cole stopped the kids with a hand signal he had no reason to expect them to know, and they stopped anyway because they could read him well enough. He listened. Footsteps. North side. Someone had come around, not the front position, that had stayed where it was. One of the tree-line figures had moved, working around to the north, which meant either they'd spotted movement from inside or they'd always planned to close the back, and were doing it now. 4 people, not 3. Cole pulled the kids back against the wall. His mind was running the geometry simultaneously. Truck was 15 feet ahead and to the right, but to reach it now meant crossing open ground with someone moving toward them from the northwest. The back door was 10 feet behind them, but going back inside put them in a fixed position in a structure with limited exits. Neither option was good. He thought for about 2 seconds, which was how long he had. "Emma," he breathed, almost no voice at all. "You see the woodpile? East corner." She looked, nodded. "Take Logan and get behind it. Stay down. Don't move until I come to you. Ranger." He touched the dog's collar and looked at him in the dark, those amber eyes finding his in a way that was almost conversational. "Stay." Ranger looked at the woodpile, looked at the kids, looked back at Cole. He went to the woodpile. Cole let out one quiet breath and turned toward the northwest, and in the same motion crouched and picked up a length of firewood from the loose stack at the cabin's base, the kind of piece that was roughly 18 inches and dense, a billet of pine heartwood, heavy, solid. Not a weapon he'd have chosen. The weapon he had. The figure came around the corner of the cabin at a jog, too fast, overconfident in the darkness, which told Cole two things instantly. This person had done this before, but not enough times, and they were relying on the assumption that a logging worker and his 2 kids were not a serious obstacle. Cole let him get 2 full steps past the corner, then he came off the wall. It wasn't complicated. It never was at close quarters. CQB at this range was physics, not finesse. Cole caught the man's forward momentum and redirected it, took him down onto the packed snow with controlled force, and had him face down and arm-locked before the man had time to understand that something had gone wrong. He was big, 220, maybe 230, and he struggled with the automatic resistance of someone who hadn't been restrained before, which made it slightly harder for about 4 seconds, and then didn't matter because joint locks don't care about size. Cole got his knee in the man's back and leaned down and said very quietly, "Don't make noise." The man stopped struggling. "Who sent you?" Nothing. Cole applied about 30% more pressure to the arm lock. The man made a sound through his teeth but kept his voice down, which told Cole he'd been trained to some level. "Last time," Cole said. "Who sent you?" I don't know what you're... You came around the north corner of a private property at midnight with 3 other people and the power cut 20 minutes ago. You know exactly what I'm talking about." A pause. The man's breathing was controlled, which was an indicator. He wasn't panicking. He was thinking, calculating what he could give up versus what he couldn't. "Private security," he said finally. "Contracted. By Victor Ashford." The pause was its own answer. "Here's what's going to happen," Cole said. "You're going to walk back to wherever your vehicle is. You're going to tell your team the assessment is complete and nothing usable was found. And you're going to tell whoever contracted you that the family wasn't home. I know it's not what you were paid for." Cole eased the lock slightly, enough to be heard as concession, not enough to be mistaken for release. "But think about what you were actually sent here to do tonight. Think about whether the pay rate covers what happens if this goes federal." Another pause. Longer this time. "There are custody documents," the man said. "We were just here to observe and document. You cut the power." "That was a precaution." "A precaution for what?" Silence. Cole let him up. The man stood slowly, brushing snow off his jacket, reassembling his dignity in the way men did when they'd been put on the ground and wanted to pretend they hadn't been. He was mid-40s, ex-military by the way he stood, which made it worse somehow. Made it more personal, the way things got personal when you found out someone from your general ecosystem had taken a contract against a family in a mountain cabin. He looked at Cole for a moment. "You were Navy," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "SEAL, 2 tours." Cole held the firewood at his side. "What, you?" The man's jaw moved. "Rangers, 1 tour." Cole didn't say anything to that. The man looked away first. "We're done tonight," the man said. "Good." He walked back around the corner and Cole listened to him moving away, and then a low exchange of voices from the direction of the front clearing, too quiet to make out words, and then footsteps retreating south toward the access road. An engine starting. 2 engines. Moving away down the road and gone. Cole waited 60 seconds after the sound disappeared. Then he went to the woodpile. Both kids were pressed against the back of the stacked wood, with Ranger between them, the dog's bulk wedged like a barrier between them and the open clearing. Logan had his face in Ranger's fur. Emma was watching the corner of the cabin with an expression that belonged on someone considerably older, focused, waiting, reading. "We're clear," Cole said. Logan's voice was muffled in dog fur. "What happened?" "They left." "Did you?" Logan pulled his face up. Even in the dark, Cole could see the complicated expression. "Did you fight someone?" "Brief conversation," Cole said. "Let's go back inside." He got the power back on by resetting the external breaker box on the cabin's south wall. It had been physically switched off, not cut, which was a small mercy and also confirmed the man's claim that they were there to observe and pressure rather than do anything more irreversible. The lights came back on with the particular yellow warmth of 60-watt bulbs that made the cabin look almost like a home. Cole made hot chocolate. Logan accepted it without irony. Emma sat at the table and wrapped both hands around her mug and said, "We can't stay here now, can we?" Cole sat across from her. He wanted to argue. He couldn't. The cabin had made sense as temporary, 2-3 weeks, until the apartment was ready. But the apartment was still 10 days out, and Victor had found them in less than a week, and the next visit was going to be something more organized than 4 men in a breaker box. "We'll figure out the next step tomorrow," he said. "Dad," her eyes over the rim of the mug, "I'm 8, not 5. He held her gaze. "I know. I'm not trying to manage you. I'm telling you I don't have the answer yet, and I need a few hours before I do." She considered that, accepted it. "Okay," she said, and then after a moment, "The woodpile was a good call. I could see both corners from there." Cole looked at his daughter. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's exactly why I picked it." They went back to sleep around 2 in the morning. The kids did, anyway, which said something about their resilience that Cole was grateful for and slightly awed by. He didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with his notebook and his burner phone, and at 3:05 he called Ellis because Ellis had said 24 hours, and it had been less than that, but that was before 4 men showed up at the cabin. Ellis answered on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been asleep either. Cole described the night in clipped, factual language. No editorializing, no emotional color, just what happened, in sequence, with as much specific detail as was relevant. He'd learned years ago that clean information was more useful than dramatic information, that the instinct to make a story more vivid for the listener was an instinct that worked against clarity. Ellis was quiet through all of it. When Cole finished, Ellis was quiet for another few seconds. "Private security," Ellis said. That's what he said. Contracted. "Armed?" "I didn't see weapons. Didn't search him thoroughly enough to confirm." "But you took him down without being shot. He was moving too fast to have been reaching for anything. Or he wasn't authorized to use force on you directly." Cole hadn't thought of that framing, but it fit. Victor taking children through documented evidence of neglect and instability was one thing. Victor's hired men physically harming a former Navy SEAL on his own property was a different category of thing entirely. It created exposure that a man of Victor's resources couldn't easily make disappear. He wanted footage, Cole said, working through it, or documentation, something he could use in court to show the environment wasn't safe. Or he wanted to scare you badly enough that you made a bad decision, left the state, left the children somewhere temporarily, did something that looked like flight or instability. He picked the wrong person to scare. Victor doesn't know that yet. Ellis paused. He knows you were in the Navy. He knows you lost your wife and your housing in the same month. He's working from a profile that doesn't include what I've seen this week. Cole said nothing to that. "Make the call to me now about something else," Ellis said. "The unknown number. I made my call yesterday afternoon. The person I reached out to confirmed they sent the message." Cole straightened slightly in his chair. "Who?" "Her name is Patricia Knoll. She was Victor's personal assistant for 11 years. She left his employment 8 months ago under circumstances that weren't voluntary. She reached out to Claire directly in the last months of Claire's life and provided some of the documentation that's now in the sealed files." A pause. "She sent you the text because she's been watching what's happening since Claire's death, and she's frightened, both of what Victor is doing and of what he'll do to her if she's connected to any legal action against him. Can she testify? She says she will if it comes to that, but she wanted me to tell you something first." Ellis's voice shifted slightly, the shift of a man delivering information he's considered carefully before speaking. Victor knows more about the trust than we thought. He doesn't know the specifics, doesn't know the structure or the activation condition, but he knows that Claire did something with the Whitmore estate. He's known since last spring. That's why he moved on the custody question so quickly after the funeral. He's not just trying to take the children, Cole. He's trying to get legal control of their financial interests. Cole sat with that. If he gets custody, Cole said slowly, he becomes the administrator of any financial assets the children hold or stand to inherit, until they're adults. A pause. Patricia says he's had that figured out since March. The picture completed itself, finally and fully, the way complex terrain features resolved once you got to elevation and could see the whole of them. This wasn't grief-motivated. This wasn't a grandfather claiming rights out of love or concern. Victor had calculated the Whitmore trust into his financial planning and was treating the children as the vehicle to collect it. Cole had known Victor was ruthless. He hadn't known the depth of the accounting. "I need to move the timeline," Cole said. "I've already started. I'm filing for a restraining order first thing this morning based on last night's incident. You'll need to make a formal statement about what happened, which I'll arrange through the county sheriff's office, not the town police. Different jurisdiction, less likely to have been influenced." Ellis stopped. "Cole, I have to be direct with you. What I'm about to do is going to make Victor accelerate. He's going to feel the legal mechanism engaging, and he's going to push everything up. You're going to see more pressure, not less, in the next 7 to 10 days. I know. Are you ready for that?" Cole looked at the kitchen, at the 2 mugs still on the table from the hot chocolate, at Ranger lying in his corner with his chin on his paws, watching Cole with those amber eyes that held about as much judgment as anything Cole had ever encountered. "I've been through worse," he said. Ellis took a breath. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." They ended the call. Cole made coffee and sat in the thin, gray, pre-dawn light that came through the east window and thought about the shape of the next 7 days. He thought about it the same way he'd thought about complex operations, not emotionally, not reactively, but architecturally. What were the likely moves? What were the resource constraints? Where were the decision points? And what did each of them branch into? Victor's most likely next move was legal and fast. An emergency custody motion, probably built on the assessment that Varden had been orchestrating, probably filed with documentation that made Cole look unstable. Cole's counter was Ellis and the trust mechanism and Claire's recordings, but those took time to deploy properly, and time was the resource he had least of. The restraining order was a speed bump, not a wall. He needed the apartment. He needed the children in school, on record, with teachers who could document their stability and engagement. He needed a fixed address that wasn't an abandoned cabin, because the cabin was going to be used against him in a courtroom. He called the landlord at 7 a.m., before it was politely acceptable to do so, and used a tone he'd last used talking to supply officers, in places where the supplies mattered more than the feelings of the people who controlled them. The water damage would be fixed by Friday. He would have keys by Saturday. The landlord understood that this was not a request. He called Dale Sutton at 7:15 and explained, without specifics, that he might need some flexibility in the next 2 weeks. Dale said, in his flat army way, "You in some kind of trouble?" And Cole said, "The legal kind." And Dale said, "Worse kind. You got it." He called Ellis back and confirmed the statement and told him about the apartment. By 8 o'clock, the kids were up and the cabin had the morning smell of oatmeal and pine smoke, and the previous night had been sorted into the category of things that had happened and been handled. That was the only sustainable way to carry things like that. You didn't forget them. You filed them in the right drawer. Logan came to the table with his bowl and said, without any particular setup, "So were they trying to kidnap us last night or just scare us?" Cole looked at his son. "What makes you ask that?" "Because if they were trying to kidnap us, there would have been more of them." Cole put his spoon down. "Where'd you get that?" Logan shrugged with one shoulder. "You said Ranger's training was for detecting threats, and he made the warning sound, not the full alarm sound. So the threat level was medium, not high. If it was a kidnap, they'd want to be sure, so they'd bring more people." Cole stared at him. 4 people, Logan added. Seems like an observation and intimidation number, not an extraction number. Emma was watching this exchange with the expression of someone watching a card trick they'd already figured out but were enjoying anyway. "That's..." Cole stopped. Started again. "That's correct thinking." "I've been listening to you and Ranger," Logan said, returning to his oatmeal. "You both have the same body language when something's one level instead of another level." Cole picked up his spoon. He didn't have anything to add to that. They left the cabin on Friday, 2 days ahead of the landlord's original schedule. Cole had made that happen through a combination of persistence and a willingness to pay the last month's rent up front, which stretched him financially in ways he'd account for later. The apartment in Silver Birch Crossing was on the second floor of a building on the edge of town. 3 bedrooms, worn carpet, a kitchen that had been updated sometime in the previous decade with appliances that had opinions about being used, and a view of the parking lot. It was exactly what it was and nothing more. And Cole looked at it and thought, fixed address, school district, documented residence, 2 exits, perfectly good apartment. The kids had their own rooms for the first time since the Ashford estate, which turned out to matter more than Cole had understood. Emma arranged her room in 45 minutes with the precision of a field commander, establishing a base of operations. Logan spread out immediately, achieving a state of controlled entropy that he seemed to find deeply settling. Ranger patrolled the apartment once, approved it, and took up a position near the front door. Monday, Emma and Logan started at Silver Birch Elementary and Middle, respectively. Cole drove them the first morning, which took 11 minutes, and stood outside the school entrance and watched them go in. Emma, with her notebook, Logan, with his birdwatching field guide tucked under one arm because he'd decided this was relevant to his general educational needs, and felt something he didn't name until he was back in the truck. And then it turned out to be something that was adjacent to hope, which he hadn't felt in a while and recognized slowly, the way you recognized a word in a language you hadn't spoken in years. He went to work. He came home. He did it again. On Wednesday, Ellis called in the afternoon with the sound of a man who'd been moving fast all day and hadn't finished moving. "Victor filed this morning," he said. "Emergency custody petition. It's built on 3 pillars: temporary housing instability, mental health concerns citing his PTSD history, and a welfare assessment that he's representing as inconclusive." Cole was in the Harwick yard, sitting on the tailgate in the cold. "Varden's assessment." "Yes." Though Doris Hatch filed a separate assessment this morning that directly contradicts it, which Victor's attorney is going to have a problem explaining to the judge. A pause that had satisfaction in it. "She filed on her own. I didn't ask her to." Cole thought about Doris Hatch's expression when Emma had shown her the schoolwork, the small, involuntary smile. "When's the hearing?" Cole said. 10 days. Family court, Judge Maureen Baird. I've appeared before her. She doesn't like political theater, and she's very good at reading manufactured urgency. Victor's going to bring everything he has. Yes, and so are we. Ellis paused. Patricia Knoll called me this morning. She wants to meet with you directly. She has physical documents that she kept, copies made over years, that she's been holding as her own protection. She's willing to hand them over if she can meet you in person first. Why in person? She wants to see if you're worth the risk. A beat. Her words, not mine. Cole looked at the tree line past the timber yard. Set it up. Already did. Thursday evening, there's a coffee place called Wren's on the south end of Birch Avenue, 6 o'clock. I'll be there. He ended the call and sat on the tailgate for another minute, the afternoon cold settling into his jacket, and ran the geometry of the next 10 days the way he ran all geometry, looking for angles he hadn't accounted for, stress points in the structure, places where a thing that looked solid was actually only held up by assumptions. Victor had filed. The machinery was moving. The hearing was 10 days away. 10 days to build the counter case, get Patricia Knoll's documents into the record, and stand in front of a judge with everything Claire had built and make it mean what she'd intended it to mean. He thought about Claire in that hospital room. He thought about the lockbox under the rotting floor, placed there precisely because she knew he'd find it eventually, and because she'd trusted a 9-year-old dog's nose to lead them there before Cole's stubbornness led them somewhere worse. He thought about Emma, age 8, watching both corners of the cabin from behind a woodpile. He thought about Logan, eating oatmeal and calmly breaking down last night's threat assessment like he'd been doing it since before he could read. We don't let them. That was the plan. He got off the tailgate, picked up his chainsaw, and went back to work. Thursday came with clear skies and a cold that had settled in to stay. Cole drove to Wren's at 5:50, parked a block away, walked the approach from the north side so he could see the entrance and the table arrangement through the window before he went in. Occupational habit. He wasn't going to stop having it. A woman sat alone at the table in the back corner. The table where you could see both doors and nobody could sit behind you. Cole registered that and registered what it meant about who he was meeting before he even saw her face. She'd chosen the position instinctively, which meant she'd been in situations where she needed it. She was in her late 40s, well-dressed in the way that was about competence rather than style, with dark hair pulled back and the posture of someone managing a significant amount of tension with a significant amount of practice. She had a coffee in front of her and both hands around it, and she watched Cole come through the door with the expression of someone making a final decision. He sat down across from her. She looked at him for a moment. "You're taller than I expected," she said. "Everyone says that." "Claire said you were hard to read." "Also everyone says that." Something moved in her expression, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one, quickly suppressed. She reached into the bag beside her chair and pulled out a padded envelope, sealed, and set it on the table between them. 11 years, she said. I kept copies of everything I thought was wrong. At first I told myself it was protection. Later I understood it was because I knew eventually someone was going to need it. Cole didn't touch the envelope yet. What's in it? Financial records showing transfers from the Ashford Family Trust to entities controlled by Caldwell's firm. 2 memos in Victor's handwriting discussing Claire's Whitmore inheritance specifically and what he called neutralization options. A recorded call. I made it on my personal phone, which I was never supposed to have in meetings, from 14 months ago, in which Victor instructs Caldwell to explore the viability of a psychiatric hold as a mechanism for managing Cole Mercer as a variable if legal custody efforts were challenged. The coffee shop sounds continued around them. The espresso machine, 2 women talking by the window, a child at a table near the door explaining something to a parent with considerable urgency. Cole looked at the envelope. A psychiatric hold. That was what they'd been building. That was the PTSD pillar in the custody petition. Not just the courts, but if the court moved too slowly, the fallback was to have Cole assessed and held long enough that emergency custody defaulted to Victor by circumstance. He picked up the envelope. You're safe now, he said. Whatever happens in that courtroom, you're on the right side of it. She looked at him steadily. Is that supposed to reassure me? No. It's supposed to be accurate. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, one small, decisive motion, the kind that finalized something. Claire said you were the best man she'd ever known, Patricia Knoll said. She also said you had absolutely no idea how to accept help. Cole didn't say anything. So let me help, she said. Let me be on the record. Let me testify if Graham needs it. I've been waiting 11 years to be useful, and I'm done waiting. Cole held the envelope in both hands. Thank you, he said, which was not something he said easily or well, and she seemed to understand both things from the way it came out. She wrapped both hands around her coffee again. Buy me a coffee, and we'll call it even. Cole raised his hand for the server. Outside, through Wren's front window, Birch Avenue moved in its evening rhythm. Shopkeepers pulling in sandwich boards, headlights on the first cars with their running lights catching the packed snow on the road. Ordinary, small town ordinary. Cole watched it and thought, 10 days. He had 10 days, a padded envelope, Claire's recordings, Ellis's legal architecture, a welfare assessment from a woman who'd filed on her own conscience, a former assistant who'd kept 11 years of receipts, and 2 kids doing schoolwork in an apartment above a parking lot. Victor Ashford had lawyers, money, influence, and Trace Varden. Cole had been in worse situations. Not many, but some. He drank his coffee and read through the top documents in the envelope while Patricia talked him through them, and the clock above the counter moved its hands in their patient arc, and somewhere across town in the apartment above the parking lot, Ranger was lying by the front door with his chin on his paws, watching it. Still. Alert. Ready, the way he'd always been ready, for whatever came through next. The documents in the padded envelope kept Cole up until past midnight. He sat at the kitchen table in the apartment with the overhead light on and read every page twice, the way he'd been trained to read intelligence reports. First pass for content, second pass for what wasn't there. The gaps and elisions that were sometimes more informative than the text itself. Patricia Knoll had been meticulous. 11 years of meticulous, which was the kind of sustained patience that either came from deep principle or deep fear, and in her case, Cole suspected it was both working in the same direction. The financial records were dense but legible once you understood the structure. Transfers routed through Caldwell's firm's subsidiary accounts, obscured by layering that was sophisticated enough to fool a casual examiner and not sophisticated enough to fool a forensic one. The memos in Victor's handwriting were worse. Precise, bloodless language describing Claire's inheritance as a legacy liability, and Cole himself as an impediment variable in the management of the family's long-term financial position. Not a son-in-law, not a father, an impediment variable. Cole read that phrase twice and put the page down and looked at the wall for a moment. Then he picked it back up and kept reading, because the only thing worse than knowing what someone thought of you was letting it stop you from using the information. The recording was on a micro SD card in a small plastic sleeve at the bottom of the envelope. Cole listened to it on his phone with the volume low, the apartment quiet around him, Ranger breathing steadily from the front door. Victor's voice was immediately recognizable, that measured baritone engineered for authority, the voice of a man who expected rooms to organize themselves around his presence. The other voice was Caldwell's, faster and more deferential, with the verbal tick of someone who confirmed each statement before the speaker had finished making it. The relevant section was 4 minutes and 20 seconds in. The PTSD angle is sustainable? That was Victor. Sustainable and documentable. His service record includes 2 flag-level incidents involving conduct that was ultimately cleared, but the review process itself creates a paper trail that, I don't need the mechanism, I need the outcome. If the legal track stalls, what's the timeline on the alternative? A pause. Varden says 72 hours from initiation to hold, assuming the assessment criteria are met, which they can be structured to structure them. Yes. Cole stopped the recording. He sat in the silence of the apartment and processed what he'd just heard with the same flat efficiency. He processed everything in the middle of the night, in the middle of difficult situations, factually, sequentially, without the emotional weight that was available for later when it wasn't a liability. They were going to have him committed, not as a primary move, as the contingency, the backup, if the custody hearing didn't produce what Victor needed fast enough. A psychiatric hold based on a manufactured assessment, 72 hours minimum, during which emergency custody of the children would transfer to the nearest available family member, which meant Victor, which meant by the time Cole was released, the legal landscape would have shifted enough that clawing it back would take months and cost more than Cole had. He called Ellis at 12:38. Ellis answered on the third ring and didn't sound like he'd been asleep, which Cole was starting to understand was just how Ellis operated during active cases. Listen to this, Cole said, and held the phone to the speaker and played the relevant section. When it finished, Ellis was quiet for 7 seconds. Cole counted. Send me the card, Ellis said. Tomorrow morning before anything else. This changes the complexity of the hearing significantly. They have something from my service record, Cole said. Flag-level incidents. Cleared, but they're going to use the review process as documentation. Which incidents? Cole told him. 2 sentences, no detail, because the detail wasn't relevant to the legal question and was relevant to things Cole didn't discuss without reason. Ellis didn't push. Were you cleared? Fully, both times. Well, then the record is clean and the review process is discoverable, which means if they introduce it, we get to introduce the clearance finding, which makes their use of it backfire. A pause. Cole, this recording, combined with Patricia's financial documentation and Claire's audio files, is not a custody case anymore. This is a criminal conspiracy case that happens to have a custody case attached to it. Cole absorbed that. How do we use that at the hearing? He said. Carefully. I don't want to overplay. Judge Baird is good, but she's going to be looking for anything that seems like a political maneuver. And if we drop everything at once, it reads as orchestrated rather than factual. Ellis was quiet for a moment, and Cole could hear him thinking, the particular quality of silence that was actually work. We lead with the welfare documentation and the school records. We let Victor's attorney build their case on the instability argument. Then we introduce the recordings and the financial documentation as response evidence. We save Patricia for last if we need her. Another pause. And we need to move on the psychiatric hold contingency. I'm going to file a preemptive motion tomorrow morning documenting the recorded conversation and requesting an injunction against any emergency psychiatric assessment of you without court approval. That closes the back door. That tips our hand on the recording. Yes, but better they know we have it than they use the option before the hearing. Ellis's voice was steady in the way of someone who'd done this in higher stakes situations and knew what the controllable variables were. Get some sleep. Sure, Cole said, which was not a commitment. He did not sleep. He made another coffee and read the documents a third time and made notes on a legal pad in the margin system he'd developed in the Navy for mission documentation. Confirmed facts on the left, inferences in the middle, questions on the right. By 3 a.m., the right column was shorter than it had been at midnight, and the left column was long enough that he had to flip to a second page. He went to bed at 3:45 and lay in the dark and listened to the buildings settle around him and thought about the hearing, which was 8 days away, and then 7, and then the days started moving the way days moved when you were waiting for a specific point, and the interval between now and then had a quality of compression to it, time behaving differently when it was counted. He delivered the micro SD card to Ellis's office at 8 the next morning and was at the Harwick yard by 8:45. Dale looked at him when he got out of the truck with the expression of a man cataloging something without commenting on it. You look like you slept in your truck, Dale said. I didn't. Worse then. Dale handed him a coffee from the thermos he kept in the cab. You good to run a saw today? I'm good. Dale looked at him for another second. You sure? Because I've got Prescott doing brush today and I can… Dale. Cole took the coffee. I'm good. Thanks. Dale nodded once, and that was the end of it, because Dale was the kind of man who asked once and then respected the answer, which was one of his better qualities and one of the reasons Cole had taken the job. The work helped. It always helped. There was something about the physical necessity of it, the way a running chainsaw demanded your complete attention or offered you immediate consequences for the lack of it. That was genuinely useful for a brain that ran too fast in the wrong directions when given open space. Cole ran his saw and moved timber and loaded a flatbed and ate lunch with Breckett and the Watts brothers, who talked about a snowmobile race in Whitefish that one of them had a cousin competing in, and Cole ate his sandwich and contributed nothing to the conversation and felt, for 55 minutes, almost like a man who didn't have a court date in 7 days. Then his regular phone buzzed. He looked at it. The text was from Emma's school, not the automated attendance system. It was from the vice principal's office. A direct message to his contact number. Mr. Mercer, could you please call us at your earliest convenience regarding a visitor to the school today? Cole called before he'd finished reading it. The vice principal was a man named Terrence Webb, measured and professional, with the tone of someone being careful with their words, while also being aware that careful words could be interpreted as concealment, which was its own kind of information. Mr. Mercer, I want to reassure you first that Emma is fine and she's in class. But we had a situation this morning that I wanted to make you aware of directly. What situation? A man came to the front office around 10 o'clock. He identified himself as a family services consultant and said he was conducting an interview with Emma Mercer as part of an ongoing welfare review. He had documentation. It looked official. And our front office staff initially… A pause. Our protocols require direct parental notification before any external interview of a student, and when our counselor flagged that protocol, the man left before we could verify his identification. Cole's jaw had tightened about 3 sentences back. What did he look like? Webb described him. Mid-50s, slight build, glasses, carrying a briefcase. Not the ex-military man from the cabin. Someone different. Someone who wore the paper trail instead of operating around it. Varden. He didn't speak to Emma, Webb said. I want to be clear about that. She doesn't know this happened. Okay. Cole kept his voice controlled. Mr. Webb, I need you to do something for me. I need you to document everything about that interaction. Time, appearance, what documentation he presented, the names of anyone in the front office who spoke with him. And I need you to call me directly if he or anyone else comes to that school asking about my children. A pause. Is there something I should be aware of, Mr. Mercer? Cole considered the question. He didn't want to create alarm. He also didn't want to leave the school operating without complete information. There's a custody proceeding, he said. My children's maternal grandfather's contesting. The man who came in today is likely a consultant working for him, operating outside appropriate legal channels. My attorney is aware. I see. Webb's voice shifted, the shift of a professional who just placed information in context and found the context clarifying. We take student safety protocols very seriously here. I'll brief our front office staff today. Thank you. Cole ended the call. He stood in the Harwick timber yard with his phone in his hand and the cold afternoon settling around him and ran the implication in 8 seconds flat. They hadn't waited for the hearing. They were building parallel pressure. The legal case in front of the judge and a documentation trail around it, getting Emma and Logan's names into as many official systems as possible so that when the hearing arrived, Victor's picture of instability was annotated by incident reports and visit logs, and the general impression of a family that kept appearing in welfare contexts. He called Ellis. Varden went to Emma's school, he said when Ellis picked up, a silence that had profanity in it without containing any. Did he reach her? No. School protocol caught it. But he was there, Ellis. He had fake documentation. That's a violation of the existing court filing standard conduct provisions. Ellis's voice had shifted into the register Cole associated with him moving fast. I'm adding it to the preemptive motion. This is good, actually. I know that's cold comfort. It's fine. Use it. It shows escalation. It shows they're not operating inside the bounds of the process they themselves initiated, which tells the judge something important about who she's dealing with. A pause. Cole, I need you to keep the children's routine absolutely unchanged. School, home, school, home. No deviations that could be documented as instability. Can you do that? Already doing it. I know. I'm saying keep doing it. Another pause, smaller. The preemptive motion filed this morning. Victor's attorney called my office 20 minutes ago. Cole waited. Caldwell himself, Ellis said. First time he's called directly. He wanted to discuss a settlement. What kind of settlement? The kind where Victor gets unsupervised visitation rights, and you acknowledge, on record, that the living situation transition was suboptimal for the children's welfare. Ellis let that sit. I told him we had no interest in settlements and that Mr. Mercer would see him in court. Good. He said, and I want you to hear this directly. He said, Mr. Ellis, your client has no idea what he's walking into. Cole looked at the tree line past the timber yard. What did you say? He said. I said, Mr. Caldwell, I've been doing this for 31 years, and in my experience, the people who say that are always talking about themselves. A beat. Then I hung up. Cole almost smiled. Almost. He went back to work and cut timber until the light went, and then drove home and made dinner and helped Logan with a geography assignment that had become somehow a detailed comparison of avian migration patterns in the Pacific Northwest, which was not geography, but which Logan had decided was close enough. Emma did math at the table while Cole cleaned up, and the apartment had the ordinary sounds of an evening in a family that was functioning: dishes, pencils, the radiator doing its radiator thing, Ranger's nails on the kitchen linoleum when he shifted positions. Cole stood at the sink and let the ordinary sounds of it settle into him like something he needed. 6 days. On Saturday, Ellis called with the hearing schedule and the witness list. Victor's side had Caldwell as lead counsel, Varden as expert witness, and 2 character witnesses whose names Cole didn't recognize. Ellis had himself, Patricia Knoll, Doris Hatch, and a forensic financial analyst named Rosen who'd reviewed the Knoll documents and was prepared to testify to the transfer patterns. Claire's recordings, Cole said. Are they in? As exhibit evidence, yes. I'll be presenting them through the audio, but I've also had them transcribed. Judge Baird has received the transcript as pre-hearing reading material. A pause. She called my office yesterday. Cole straightened. A judge called you directly. To ask a procedural question about the chain of custody on the recordings. Ellis's voice was carefully neutral. Which is a normal question. What was less normal was that she asked it herself instead of having her clerk do it, which tells me she's engaged with the material and wanted to understand it without an intermediary. As Cole processed that. Is that good or bad? In my experience, judges who go direct are judges who've already formed a preliminary picture and are checking the corners of it. Whether that picture benefits us depends on what picture she formed. A pause. But the weight of the evidence is on our side. I want to be straight with you about that. We have more and better than they do. What we don't control is whether Victor does something between now and Tuesday that changes the field. Like what? I don't know, and that's the part that concerns me. Cole didn't sleep well Saturday or Sunday. He didn't sleep badly either. He was past the point of being destabilized by sleep deprivation, had built tolerance for it across years of situations where the alternative to functioning on 4 hours was not functioning at all. He ran perimeter checks on the apartment building's exterior each night, not because he expected another physical approach. The restraining order and the preemptive motion had closed that off, at least overtly, but because the act of checking was itself a form of control, and control was what you maintained when everything else was moving. Monday, the day before the hearing, he drove the kids to school and went to Ellis's office for a 2-hour prep session that felt less like a legal briefing and more like a mission rehearsal. Ellis walked him through likely cross-examination questions, the sequence of evidence presentation, the physical logistics of the courtroom. He was precise and unhurried, which Cole appreciated. When Caldwell questions you, Ellis said, he's going to focus on 3 things: your housing history, your employment income, and your mental health treatment history. He'll frame each one as a disqualifier. Your answers need to be direct, factual, and short. Don't explain more than the question requires. I know how to answer questions under pressure. I know you do. I'm reminding you because courtroom pressure is different from the pressure you've been trained for. In a courtroom, the temptation is to explain yourself, to provide context, to make them understand. Resist it. Short answers make them work harder and give them less to use. Cole nodded. He'll also try to introduce the flag-level incident reviews, Ellis continued. I'll object on relevance grounds, and I'll win that objection, but there may be a version of it that Baird allows for context. If that happens, and she asks you to respond, tell the truth. You were cleared. State it once, cleanly, and stop. What about the psychiatric hold plan? Oh, that's the one I'm most concerned about because it's the one they haven't deployed yet. If they have it queued, they might try to initiate it today, after business hours, before the hearing tomorrow, to create a fact on the ground that they can reference in court. Ellis looked at Cole steadily. Which is why you are not going anywhere alone today or tonight. I want you with the children or documented somewhere public from now until the hearing. You think they'd actually move on that? I think Caldwell called me offering a settlement the morning after our preemptive motion dropped. And I think the only reason you offer a settlement you know the other side won't take is because you're running out of confidence in your primary plan. Ellis folded his hands on the desk. So yes, I think they might. Cole spent Monday afternoon and evening in ways that were documented. School pickup at 3:15, recorded on the school's sign-out log. Dinner at the diner on Birch Avenue, paid by card, time-stamped receipt. Back to the apartment where he called his brother Marcus in Arizona and talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, which was its own kind of important, and then sat with the kids while they watched a nature documentary about migration patterns that Logan had specifically selected and Emma had accepted with the resigned grace of someone who'd made peace with her brother's niche. Nothing happened Monday night. Nothing happened Monday night, and Cole lay in the dark knowing that the absence of something wasn't the same as the thing not existing. And at 4 a.m, he finally accepted that he wasn't going to sleep and got up and made coffee and read through his notes one more time and thought about Claire saying, I hate that I'm not there to tell you to your face that it's going to be okay. He thought, I'm going to make it okay. Not for the fortune, not for the legal victory, though both of those things were real and mattered. For the simple fact of Emma's room being her own, and Logan knowing which birds came to a specific feeder in a specific yard, and a dog who'd found a box under a rotting floor because he'd never stopped doing the job. For the fact that people who are written off have a tendency to show up. Tuesday morning, the courthouse in Silver Birch Crossing was an older building, stone-fronted, with the particular gravity of a place that had been deciding things for a long time. Cole wore the only suit he owned, dark gray, bought for Claire's funeral, which was both the wrong and exactly right garment for today. He arrived at 8:15 with Ellis, 30 minutes before the scheduled start, and they went through the building's security with the mild indignity of metal detectors and briefcase searches and the general suggestion that everyone who entered was potentially dangerous until demonstrated otherwise, which Cole found weirdly leveling. Victor Ashford was already in the corridor. Cole had expected that. Victor operated by arriving first to every situation, because arriving first was itself a form of control. You established the space. You set the emotional temperature. You made the other party come to you. Cole had cataloged this about Victor years ago and filed it without comment. What Cole hadn't expected was how Victor looked. He was impeccably dressed, wool suit, that silver hair perfectly maintained, the physical presence fully intact. But around his eyes, there was something that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago in the hallway of the Ridgemont estate. Something that was either fatigue or calculation running too hard for too long. He looked like a man who was absolutely in control of his presentation and spending a significant amount of energy maintaining that. Their eyes met in the corridor. Victor held Cole's gaze. Cole held his back. Neither of them said anything. Caldwell was beside Victor, already moving toward Ellis with the sharp, purposeful stride of a man about to file something. And Ellis intercepted him, and they had a low exchange that Cole didn't try to follow because it was Ellis's territory, and Ellis was better at it than him. Cole looked away from Victor and found a bench along the corridor wall and sat down. 30 seconds later, Logan appeared at his left elbow. Cole looked at him. "What? You're supposed to be with Mrs. Aiken." He'd arranged for the school counselor to sit with both kids in the waiting area upstairs during the hearing. "I know," Logan said. "I just wanted to—" He stopped. He was wearing his good jacket, the one Cole had bought him at the second-hand store in town, and his hair was brushed in the specific way it got brushed when Emma had done it, which meant they'd coordinated this. "I wanted to tell you something before it starts." Cole waited. "Ranger picked the cabin," Logan said. "He didn't have to stay in that corner. He stayed because he was trying to tell you, and you listened." He looked at his father with 8-year-old eyes that were carrying more than they should have had to carry. "You always listen, even when you don't know you are. I wanted to say that." Cole looked at his son for a long moment. "Go back to Mrs. Aiken," he said quietly. "Yeah." Logan stood up, paused. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Don't let him win." He walked back down the corridor. Cole watched him go and then turned forward and looked at his hands and breathed once, slow and complete. And when he looked up, Ellis was standing in front of him. "Ready?" Ellis said. "Yes." They went in. Judge Maureen Baird was 60, compact, with reading glasses she used as a prop more than an aid, picking them up and putting them down to pace her own speech, Cole observed. She ran her courtroom with the specific economy of someone who'd developed zero tolerance for wasted time through 30-something years of watching people waste it. She gave both sides equal amounts of attention and no detectable warmth for either. Caldwell opened for Victor's side. He was polished and organized, building his picture of Cole with the methodical patience of someone who'd done this many times. The housing transition framed as chaotic rather than forced. The logging income quantified against the children's previous educational and material circumstances. The welfare assessment cited in a version that omitted Doris Hatch's contradictory filing until Ellis objected and the judge required its inclusion. Cole watched Caldwell work and cataloged it and waited. Ellis countered with the school enrollment records, the attendance log, the documented income from Harwick Timber, the apartment lease. Dry, factual, the structural picture of a man doing the work of being a parent in difficult circumstances. He didn't editorialize. He didn't invite sympathy. He just stacked documents the way you stacked evidence. One thing at a time, each one true. Then Caldwell called Trace Varden. Varden was slight and professorial in appearance, with the kind of careful vocabulary that was designed to sound clinical while carrying a predetermined conclusion. He testified about the welfare assessment with the language of expertise, developmental concerns, environmental stressors, historical trauma indicators, building a picture of a household in chronic instability. He was good at it. Cole sat beside Ellis and listened to the picture being constructed and felt the same sensation he'd felt in the timber yard the day the SUV first appeared at the tree line, the awareness of a threat being organized in your direction. Caldwell finished his direct examination with a flourish that was barely a flourish, the understated kind that courtroom lawyers used when they were confident enough to let the substance do the work. Ellis stood. He didn't start with Varden's methodology or his credentials or any of the points Cole had expected. He started with a single document, which he asked the court's permission to enter as Exhibit 14, and which he described as a record of employment history from the Montana Department of Family Services. "Mr. Varden," Ellis said, "you left your position at the Department of Family Services in August of last year. Can you tell the court the circumstances under which that departure occurred?" Varden's expression shifted by 3 degrees. "I resigned to pursue private consultancy." "Were there any formal performance reviews or conduct inquiries filed against you in the 18 months prior to your resignation?" "There were. Some administrative matters. Were there or were there not formal conduct inquiries filed, Mr. Varden? Yes or no?" A pause. "Yes." "And were those inquiries related to the validity of assessment methodologies used in custody determinations?" Caldwell objected. Baird overruled. Varden answered. "There were questions raised about documentation procedures." "Thank you," Ellis said. He turned and picked up the next document. "I'd like to enter Exhibit 15. What followed was not the dramatic evisceration that Cole had seen in courtroom dramas. There was no single devastating question that made Varden collapse. It was methodical and relentless, the way Ellis did everything, each document building on the last, each answer from Varden qualifying the previous answer, the picture shifting incrementally until what had been presented as expert clinical assessment looked, in the accumulated light of 15 minutes of cross-examination, like a product ordered and paid for. Baird's face was unreadable throughout. She made notes. Caldwell redirected, trying to rehabilitate. Got some of it back. Not all. Then Ellis called Patricia Knoll. She came in and sat in the witness chair with the straight posture of someone who'd decided before she arrived that she was not going to be afraid of this room. She answered Ellis's questions about her employment history and her relationship to the Ashford organization with the clear, flat specificity of someone who'd been rehearsing this moment for 11 years. And when Ellis asked her to describe the contents of the documents she'd maintained, she described them with the same flat specificity, and the courtroom was very quiet. When Caldwell cross-examined her, he was aggressive in a controlled way, trying to cast her as a disgruntled employee with a personal agenda. She looked at him and said, "I kept copies of everything because I knew eventually someone would need them to protect children. Today is that day." She didn't say it dramatically. She said it the way you stated a fact you'd known long enough that it had become ordinary. Baird wrote something down. Ellis presented Claire's recordings through the audio system, the transcripts already in the judge's hands. The courtroom heard Victor's voice discussing Cole as an impediment variable. The courtroom heard the conversation about the psychiatric hold option. Caldwell objected twice. Baird overruled both times. Then Caldwell cross-examined Cole. Cole sat in the witness chair and looked at Caldwell and ran Ellis's advice through his head. Short, direct, factual. Don't explain. "Mr. Mercer, you were living in my client's family home at the time of your wife's death." "Yes." "And you were asked to leave that home." "We were required to leave, yes." "And in the 2 weeks following, your children lived in an unregistered, uninhabited structure without consistent utilities." "We lived in a cabin with functional heating, food, water, and bedding for 8 days." "During which time a county welfare assessment was conducted." "Yes, and that assessment noted environmental concerns." "A second assessment conducted independently by the same department did not." Cole kept his voice level, short, factual. "Both are in the record." Caldwell shifted. "Mr. Mercer, you have a history of military service that included formal review proceedings." Ellis was on his feet. "Objection? Relevance." Baird looked at Caldwell. "Your Honor, the petitioner's position is that Mr. Mercer's fitness as a primary caregiver requires Mr. Caldwell." Baird's voice was quiet in the specific way of quiet voices that have authority behind them. "Unless you're prepared to present evidence of a finding, not a review, a finding, that reflects on Mr. Mercer's fitness, I'm going to sustain the objection." "We are, yes, prepared to present, then present it, or move on." Caldwell moved on. He spent 12 more minutes on the income question, the apartment, the children's school enrollment timing. Cole answered everything in the register Ellis had coached him to. Direct, short, free of the emotional color that would give Caldwell something to work with. When it was over and Cole was back in his seat, Ellis leaned over and said quietly, "You did fine." Cole didn't answer. He was watching Baird, who was reviewing something in the file in front of her with the particular concentration of a woman who'd already made a decision and was confirming it against the record. Caldwell made his closing argument. It was thorough and well-constructed and presented Victor Ashford as a concerned grandfather seeking stability for his grandchildren in the aftermath of family tragedy. Cole listened to it and thought, he's good. He was. In a different case, in a different set of facts, it might have been enough. Ellis made his closing argument. He didn't theatricalize. He didn't use language designed to move the room emotionally. He summarized the evidence in sequence and ended with a single paragraph that Cole would remember with precision for the rest of his life. Your Honor, the petitioner claims to be acting in the best interests of these children. The record before you today contains, in Victor Ashford's own words, documentation of financial motivation, operational planning against the children's father, and the use of a minor, his own 8-year-old granddaughter, as a communication vehicle for intimidation. Whatever his stated intentions, his documented actions describe something else entirely. The court is capable of reading the difference. Baird looked at the room for a moment. I'm going to recess for 1 hour, she said, and then I'll have a ruling. The corridor outside the courtroom had a bench against the wall where Cole sat for 53 minutes and did not check his phone and did not talk to anyone and thought about a woman in a hospital bed with a laptop and a lockbox and a dog she trusted more than most people. Ellis came and sat beside him at the 40-minute mark, and they sat together in the way of men who'd done what could be done and were waiting for the part that couldn't be controlled. Whatever happens in there, Ellis said. I know, Cole said. She's going to... I know, Ellis. They were quiet. The door opened at 53 minutes. They went back in. Baird came in and sat and looked at the room without preamble. I've reviewed the complete record in this matter, she said, and I want to state clearly before I give my ruling that what I have reviewed represents one of the more troubling applications of family court process I have encountered in this jurisdiction. The evidence presented today includes recorded conversations in which the petitioner discussed strategies to remove the respondent from his children's lives through mechanisms including manufactured psychiatric assessment and the use of third-party operatives to conduct surveillance on a private residence. She paused, not for drama, for precision. These are not the actions of a concerned family member. They are the documented actions of someone pursuing a financial and strategic objective using children as instruments. Caldwell was making notes. Victor's face was a held expression that was working very hard to remain held. Full physical and legal custody is awarded to Cole Mercer, the respondent, effective immediately. The petitioner's application is denied in its entirety. Another pause. I am additionally referring the financial documentation presented today as Exhibit 23 through 27 to the State Attorney General's Office for review of potential fraud and conspiracy charges. And I am issuing a protective order restricting Victor Ashford from any unsupervised contact with Emma and Logan Mercer pending that review. She looked at both tables equally. We're adjourned. The gavel came down. The room moved around Cole in ways he cataloged without fully processing. Ellis's hand on his shoulder, Caldwell's voice across the room in urgent, low conversation, someone on the other side of the gallery making a sound that got quickly suppressed. Cole sat and looked at the front of the courtroom where the judge had just been and thought about exactly nothing for about 15 seconds, which was the closest he'd come to silence inside his own head in 3 months. Then he stood up. He needed to get to the kids. He was in the corridor before Ellis had his briefcase closed, moving through the building's quiet stone interior toward the stairs that led to the waiting area upstairs. And he was thinking about Logan's face that morning and what he'd said about listening. And he was thinking about Emma saying, "We don't let them." And he was thinking about a dog with a chip in his ear from a door frame in Fallujah, lying in the corner of a cabin in a blizzard, waiting for someone to pay attention. He went up the stairs, and Victor Ashford was at the top of them, not with Caldwell, alone. Standing at the landing with his coat over his arm and that silver hair and the expression of a man who'd just lost something he'd spent years believing was already his, and who was still processing the fact that it wasn't. They stood 6 feet apart on the landing. Cole waited. She left you everything, Victor said. His voice was not what Cole expected, not the controlled baritone, something underneath it that was older and less managed. I want you to understand that I know that I understand what she did. Okay, Cole said. She didn't trust me. He said it flatly, without self-pity, the way you stated a fact that had been confirmed by events. I told myself she was wrong, that she was sick and frightened and making decisions from fear rather than... He stopped. I told myself that for a long time. Cole looked at him. Those kids, Victor said. Emma and Logan. He stopped again. The hall was quiet around them. They look like her. I know, Cole said. Victor looked at him for a long moment with something in his face that was too complicated to read cleanly and too real to dismiss. Then he looked away. Cole went past him up the corridor. He found Emma and Logan in the waiting room with Mrs. Eichen, and Logan was mid-sentence about something and stopped when Cole came through the door, and Emma looked at his face and read it the way she read everything. And before Cole could say a word, she crossed the room and put her arms around his waist, and he put his hand on the back of her head, and they stood like that for a moment while Logan watched. We won, Logan said. Not a question. Yeah, Cole said. We won. Logan looked at the ceiling for a second, which was how he processed things that were large and didn't fit immediately into available categories. Then he looked back at his father. Can we get the pancakes now? He said. Cole laughed. It came out rougher than he expected, and shorter, and he didn't try to make it into anything other than what it was. Yeah, bud, he said, we can get the pancakes. The pancakes were at the diner on Birch Avenue, the same one Cole had taken them to the morning after their first night in the cabin, when everything was still raw and uncertain, and the oatmeal at the cabin had been the only alternative. Logan ordered a stack of 4 with blueberries and ate 3.5 of them with the focused efficiency of someone making up for weeks of deficient carbohydrate intake. Emma ordered one and ate the whole thing slowly, thinking between bites in the way she thought between everything: processing, cataloging, filing. Cole ordered eggs again, ate them this time. Nobody talked much during the meal, which was its own kind of talking. The silence of people who'd been through something together and were letting the throughness of it settle before they tried to put language on it. The diner was warm and slightly too loud and smelled like coffee and griddle grease and the specific comfortable ordinariness of a place that had been feeding people through their various circumstances for decades, without requiring them to explain what those circumstances were. Ellis had gone back to his office to begin the administrative machinery that a court ruling of that scope required. Notifications, filings, the legal architecture of transferring what had been decided in that courtroom into the world where it actually had to exist. He'd shaken Cole's hand outside the courthouse and said, Claire would have enjoyed today. And Cole had nodded and not said anything because there wasn't anything to say to that. They drove home after lunch through the afternoon light that came in low and gold across the snow-covered valley, the specific quality of winter light in mountain country that turned everything it touched into something more considered than it actually was. Logan had his window down an inch despite the cold, the way he always did on long drives, and Emma had her notebook open and was sketching something Cole couldn't see from the front seat. He drove and thought about Victor on the landing. They looked like her. He'd filed that away because the courthouse wasn't the place to unpack it, and the diner wasn't the place either, and he wasn't entirely sure there was a place yet. What he knew was that Victor was not a simple villain. Had never been, really, even when he was doing simple villain things. He was a man who had spent his life organizing the world according to his own calculations, and had woken up one morning to find that the person he'd most underestimated had been calculating right alongside him the entire time. That was its own kind of damage. Cole wasn't prepared to feel sorry for it, but he was prepared to acknowledge that it was real. "Dad," Emma said. "Yeah." "What happens now?" He had been waiting for that question. He'd been waiting for it since the judge's gavel came down, because Emma's questions were never purely informational. They were assessments, taking his temperature on the future the same way she took temperatures on everything. She wanted to know what he was going to do, not just what was going to happen. "A lot of things," he said. "Most of them take time." "The money," she said. Not accusatory, just naming it. "Yeah." "Mom's money." "Your grandmother Whitmore's money. Your mom's inheritance from her." He kept his eyes on the road. She kept it separate on purpose. Kept it safe. Emma was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do with it?" Cole had been thinking about this since the night he'd read Claire's letter by flashlight in a frozen cabin. He'd thought about it the way he thought about complex problems, Not in terms of what he wanted, which was abstract, but in terms of what the situation required, which was concrete. The trust was structured to protect the children's interests, which meant Cole's use of it was governed by those interests and by the terms Claire and Ellis had built into the instrument. That was fine. That was exactly what Cole wanted. What Cole wanted, underneath all of it, was to do something that Claire would have recognized, something that matched the spirit of what she'd built, which wasn't wealth accumulation, wasn't status, wasn't even security in the traditional sense. It was something more specific and more human than any of those things. "I'm going to build something," he said. "Build what?" "I don't know the exact shape of it yet." He paused. "Something that helps people who need the kind of help we needed." Emma considered that for a while. She went back to her sketch. After about 2 miles, she said, "I have some ideas about the building part." "I know you do." "The cabin structure was bad," she said, in the tone of a professional offering an objective assessment. "The siding was actually good. Elevation, tree cover on 3 sides, natural windbreak on the north, but the foundation work and the load-bearing configuration were—" "Emma." "What?" "You're 8. I've been reading structural engineering basics since last spring." A pause. "Mom's medical books were too advanced. I needed something I could actually use." Cole looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was already back to sketching, her pencil moving with the small, decisive motions of someone who knew exactly what they were putting on the page. He thought, "She gets that from you, Claire." He thought, I know she does." The apartment felt different when they came back to it that afternoon. Not physically different, the worn carpet and the opinionated appliances were exactly where they'd been that morning. But different the way places felt different when the thing that had been pressing against them from the outside was gone. There was a quality to the air of a space where the pressure had been relieved. Cole stood in the kitchen and felt it and thought, this is what safe feels like. He'd forgotten the specific texture of it. Ranger met them at the door with the full-body greeting of a dog who'd been alone all day and had opinions about that. Logan crouched and submitted to the enthusiastic inspection with the philosophical acceptance of someone who understood this was the price of having a dog and considered it reasonable. Ranger checked Cole next, nose to hands, to jacket, going through the scent record of the day in his systematic way, and whatever he found seemed to satisfy him because he circled once and went back to his position near the door. Cole stood in the kitchen and called his brother Marcus. "We won," he said when Marcus picked up, a pause that had years inside it. All the conversations they'd had since Claire's diagnosis, the ones that ran late and covered things they didn't usually cover, the fraternal vocabulary of two men who'd learned to talk to each other mostly through difficulty. Then Marcus said, "Tell me." Cole told him. The condensed version, the essentials, without the parts that would require context Marcus didn't have. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was something he'd learned to do better in the last few years, and which Cole appreciated without saying so. "What are you going to do now?" Marcus said when Cole finished. "Build something." "With the money." "With the money, yeah." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You know she had that planned." "I know." "Not the legal part. That too. But the other part, the what comes after part." A pause. "She talked to me about it. Last February. She called me and she said she needed me to listen for a while and not respond immediately, which you know is hard for me, but I did it. And she talked for about 20 minutes about what she wanted for you. Not what she wanted to leave you, what she wanted for you." Another pause. "She said you were the best man she'd ever known, and that your problem was you didn't know what to do with yourself when there wasn't a mission." Cole leaned against the kitchen counter. "So she gave you one," Marcus said. Cole didn't say anything for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I think that's right. Are you okay?" "Getting there." "That's honest." A pause, and then the kind of brief pause Marcus used when he was going to say something direct and was giving himself one last chance to not say it. "She loved you in a way that made plans for you. That's—" He stopped. "That's something." "Yeah," Cole said. "It is." He ended the call and stood in the kitchen for a while, and the apartment was quiet around him except for the sound of Logan explaining something to Ranger in the next room, apparently something about migratory birds, which Ranger was tolerating with the patience of a professional. The days after the ruling moved differently than the days before it, slower in some ways, faster in others. The way time reorganized itself once the fixed point of a deadline was removed, and you were operating in open terrain again. Ellis managed the administrative proceedings with his characteristic efficiency. The trust activation was documented and verified by the end of the week. The financial structure Claire had built was transferred into operational status, and the first communications from the State Attorney General's office regarding Victor's financial records arrived on Friday, 4 days after the ruling. Cole didn't follow the legal proceedings against Victor closely. That was Ellis's territory, and Ellis handled it without requiring Cole's participation beyond a single formal deposition that took 2 hours on a Thursday morning. What Cole understood from Ellis's summaries was that the picture being uncovered by the AG's investigation was more extensive than even the Knoll documents had suggested. Years of financial manipulation, not just of the Whitmore estate, but of several other entities connected to the Ashford family trust, conducted with the methodical patience of a man who had never expected to be looked at too closely. Caldwell resigned from his firm within 3 weeks. Ellis mentioned it in passing without much editorializing. Trace Varden lost his private consultancy license pending the investigation. He sent a written statement to the court that was, Ellis said, primarily notable for the number of times it deployed the phrase, acting in good faith. Patricia Knoll received a formal acknowledgement from the AG's office that her documentation had been central to the investigation. She called Ellis to ask if she could send Cole a note directly, and Ellis gave her the address. The note arrived on a Monday, written on personal stationery in handwriting that was small and precise, and it said, "I've been carrying this for 11 years. Thank you for giving me somewhere to put it down." Cole read it twice and put it in the drawer where he kept Claire's letter and Emma's first drawings from the cabin. The apartment was always going to be temporary. Cole had known that, and the kids had known it, and Ranger had known it in the way Ranger always knew which situations were transitional, a slightly higher state of alert, the equivalent of not fully unpacking. By the end of February, Cole had begun the process that would end the transition. He drove out to Pine Hollow Ridge on a Saturday when the snow had begun to thin at the lower elevations and the access road was passable. He parked where he'd always parked, beside the cabin that was still standing, still groaning a little in the wind, still fundamentally the shape of what it had always been. He walked around it slowly. Emma was right. The sighting was good. Elevation, natural windbreak, the tree coverage on 3 sides that gave both privacy and protection. The access road was inconvenient for normal life, but that inconvenience was also a feature, depending on what you intended the place to be. Cole stood in the cleared space in front of the cabin and looked at the valley below and thought about what Graham Ellis had said when he'd first described Claire's trust. She built you a fortress. He thought about what Marcus had said. She gave you a mission. He thought about the men he'd served with who'd come back carrying things the civilian world had no category for. Not broken, exactly, because broken implied something that had failed, and what they carried wasn't failure, it was accumulation. Years of accumulated experience that the world around them didn't have the vocabulary to engage with. He thought about the dogs that had worked alongside them, the Melisses and the Shepherds and the Labs, trained to a purpose and then in many cases unable to find that purpose again. The way Ranger had been until Cole had signed the paperwork. He thought about families like his own, forced out, forced into, holding together through circumstances that were supposed to break them and didn't quite, and needing somewhere to land that wasn't just shelter, but was something with intent behind it. He drove back to Silver Birch Crossing and called Ellis. "I know what I want to build," he said. Ellis had been expecting this call. Cole could tell by how quickly he had a notepad. "Tell me," Ellis said. Cole talked for 20 minutes. He wasn't polished about it. He started in the middle, backed up, clarified, went sideways into specifics that probably could have waited, the way he talked when he was working through something that was still being built as he described it. Ellis wrote and occasionally asked a question and did not try to shape what Cole was saying into something more formal, which Cole appreciated. When Cole finished, Ellis was quiet for a moment. "That's going to take about 18 months to build properly," he said. "The zoning, the construction, the nonprofit structure, the accreditation for the service animal component." "I know." "The property acquisition from the timber holding company is probably the most complex piece. They're not currently looking to sell, which means I have a number they'll listen to." A pause. "Yes, I suppose you do." Ellis considered. Cole, this is going to require a board, a director, program staff. It's a full operation. I know that too. Are you sure you want to... Ellis? Cole looked out the apartment window at the parking lot below, at the ordinary afternoon of Silver Birch Crossing going about its business. She built something for me when I couldn't see that I needed it yet. I'm going to build something for people who are exactly where I was 8 weeks ago. That's the plan. A pause. All right, Ellis said. I'll call the property people Monday.
Bishmans.
The Timber Holding Company was a corporate entity with offices in Billings and a passive relationship to the Pine Hollow Ridge parcel. The land was on their books as a low-priority asset. The cabin was a liability they hadn't gotten around to addressing, and the access road maintenance was a recurring cost they'd have preferred to eliminate. Cole's offer, which was fair and straightforward and delivered without leverage or drama, was accepted in 11 days. He told the kids over dinner the night the paperwork came through. We're going back to the cabin, Logan said. Not exactly back. Forward. Cole set the documents on the table and pushed them to the center. We're building something new on that land. Emma pulled the papers toward her and read for about 45 seconds with the speed of a child who'd been reading above her level since first grade. A retreat center, she said. Veterans and service dogs. Families in transition. People who need the kind of place where the point isn't treatment or charity. It's just somewhere solid to land while they figure out the next thing. Logan was reading over Emma's shoulder, which he always did and she always tolerated with barely visible resignation. Summit Haven, he read. That's what it's called? That's what it's called. Who picked the name? Cole considered. Your mom, kind of. Emma looked up from the papers. Kind of how? He told them about Claire's letter. Not all of it. Some of it was his, the part that was just him and Claire in the dark of that cabin with Ranger watching from the corner, and that part would stay his. But he told them about the instruction, the box, the plan she'd built, and the words she'd used. I couldn't stand the thought of him winning. He told them that everything she'd built was ultimately about this. Not the money, not the legal victory, but the thing that came after. The thing you built when the fight was over. Emma listened with her chin on her hands, elbows on the table, the posture Claire had always corrected at meals, and that Cole had given up correcting because some things were worth the flexibility. She was really organized, Emma said when he finished. She was. For someone who said she wasn't a planner, Cole almost laughed. She said that? She used to say, I'm not a planner, I'm a preparer. There's a difference. He hadn't known she'd said that to the kids. He sat with it for a moment. She was right, he said. There's a difference. Logan had gone quiet in the way he went quiet when something was landing in him at a depth he wasn't ready to talk about yet. He was looking at the table. After a while he said, Can I name one of the trails? Cole looked at him. At Summit Haven, Logan said. When there are trails. Can I name one? Yeah, bud, you can name one. Okay. He went back to looking at the table. I'm going to need to do some research first. Of course you are. Construction began in late April. Cole had anticipated that managing a construction project on a mountain property while working a logging job and parenting 2 kids would be complicated, and it was, and the specific nature of the complication was different from what he'd anticipated, which was true of all complex operations. There were permitting delays that required 3 separate trips to the county office and 1 formal appeal. There was a contractor who turned out to be optimistic about timelines in ways that were structurally problematic and had to be replaced halfway through the foundation work. There were weeks when the project felt like something that was expanding faster than Cole's ability to manage it, and weeks when it felt like it wasn't moving at all. Ellis managed the nonprofit structure and the board formation, finding 2 veterans advocacy organizations and a wilderness therapy program willing to partner formally, and a board chair named Dr. Sandra Keys, who was a clinical psychologist with a background in trauma-informed care and the particular quality of being direct and organized without being clinical about human beings, which Cole had determined was the most important qualification. Dale Sutton joined the board in September, which Cole hadn't asked him to do and which Dale hadn't announced. He'd just appeared at the first formal board meeting and sat down and said, I figure someone from the outside needs to keep the rest of you honest. And that was the extent of his explanation. Cole had found it one of the more quietly meaningful things that happened that year. The building work had a rhythm that Cole settled into the way he settled into physical work generally. Total immersion, full attention, the daily specificity of concrete problems and concrete solutions. He swung a hammer when there was a hammer to swing. He pored over blueprints at night with Emma beside him at the kitchen table, who had strong opinions about load distribution that turned out, when checked against the structural engineer's calculations, to be consistently correct. Emma, the structural engineer had said during one site visit, looking at her with the expression of a professional updating their assumptions in real time. "How old are you?" 8 3/4. "Where did you learn reading?" she said. "An observation." She pointed to a beam junction. "That connection is going to need a gusset plate." The engineer looked at the junction, looked at Emma. "She's right," he told Cole. "I know," Cole said. Summer at Pine Hollow Ridge was different from winter in ways Cole hadn't fully anticipated. The same trees that had blocked the blizzard made corridors of shade in the July heat, and the access road that had been a tactical liability in snow became a feature. The approach through the trees gave the property a quality of arrival, the sense of transition from one kind of place to another, which turned out to be exactly right for what Summit Haven was intended to be. Cole walked the land on evenings when the construction crew had gone home and the property was quiet, and he understood more clearly each time why Claire's trust had been structured the way it was, not as wealth to maintain, but as a mechanism for making something. Ranger turned 10 in August. Cole acknowledged this privately, without ceremony, by giving him the expensive dog food instead of the regular kind and not making him do any of the perimeter checks that week, which Ranger ignored, so he did the checks anyway, because that was who he was. And you didn't stop being who you were because someone decided you'd earned a rest. Cole watched him work the property perimeter on a Tuesday evening in late August, moving through the frame of the half-built Summit Haven structure with that particular gait of a working dog in familiar terrain, unhurried and completely sure of himself, and thought about the cabin floor and what was buried under it. He thought about this often. He thought about the chain of it, Ranger's nose, the hollow sound under the board, the lockbox, Claire's handwriting, the letter that had sent him to Ellis, the envelope Patricia Knoll had carried for 11 years, the hearing, the gavel. All of it connected, all of it causally linked from the moment Ranger had pressed his chin to the edge of that hole in the floor and looked up at Cole with those amber eyes. What would have happened without that? He ran the counterfactual sometimes, the way you ran terrain analysis on a route you hadn't taken. What were the branch points? Where did the alternatives lead? What was the probability distribution of outcomes if the dog hadn't found the box? The answer was always the same: worse. The answer was always darker and more expensive and more permanent. He never finished that analysis because he didn't need to. Ranger had found the box. The building opened on the first weekend of November, 11 months after a moving crew had walked into the Ashford estate without knocking and given Cole 40 minutes to pack a life. The ceremony was small and deliberately informal. Cole had resisted every suggestion that it be otherwise, partly because formal ceremonies made him uncomfortable, and partly because what Summit Haven was supposed to be was a place where people didn't have to perform, and performing at the opening seemed like the wrong tone for that. Ellis was there. Dale was there. Patricia Knoll drove up from Billings. Doctor. Keyes brought 2 of the program's first incoming clients, a veteran named Carter, who'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan and was navigating re-entry with a service dog named Buck, a yellow lab with the focused calm of a well-trained working dog, and a woman named Rosa, who was between housing situations and had 3 kids under 12, and the general posture of someone who was very tired of being evaluated by people with clipboards. Cole shook Carter's hand on the porch of the main building, which was new timber over the original siding, with a foundation that the structural engineer had confirmed was solid and a load-bearing configuration that Emma had signed off on, which Cole had allowed because she would have done it anyway, and because she was correct. "What's the dog's name?" Logan asked Carter, crouching immediately. "Buck. He's friendly, but you should ask first." Logan looked at Carter. "Can I?" "Go ahead." Buck accepted Logan's greeting with the dignified tolerance of a senior professional, and Logan began a detailed inquiry into Buck's training history that Carter answered with the patient warmth of a man who'd learned that explaining his dog's work was one of the better conversation starters available to him. Rosa's kids ran the length of the porch and came back. One of them found Ranger sitting near the door and approached with the reckless confidence of a child who had never been taught to be afraid of large dogs. And Ranger allowed the approach and the subsequent enthusiastic petting with the expression of a dog who had made peace with his role as an ambassador. Cole stood on the porch of Summit Haven and looked at the valley. The afternoon light came in low from the southwest, the same angle it came in every November afternoon at this elevation, catching the snow on the upper ridgeline and making it shine. Below, the valley floor was brown gold with the last grass before true winter set in, and the access road ran through it in a long, curving line that looked exactly like what it was, a way in, a way out, depending on the direction you were traveling. Emma appeared at his elbow. She'd been everywhere today, managing things he hadn't asked her to manage, making sure the coffee was ready for the staff walkthrough, tracking down a box of supply labels that had been misplaced, explaining to one of the contractor's assistants where the secondary water connection was, with the precision of a person who had memorized the blueprints because she'd helped make them. "It's good," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah. The siding is good. The structure is good." She looked at the valley. "The view is good." Claire would have liked it. Emma was quiet for a moment. She would have said the main room needs a better light fixture. Cole laughed. It was a real laugh this time. Not rough, not short, but the kind that had something larger moving through it. "That's exactly what she would have said. I'll find a better one. I know you will." Emma leaned against him the way she had when she was 5, before she'd developed the general personal architecture of someone who didn't lean on things. She stayed there for about 30 seconds, which was enough. Then she pushed off and went back inside to address whatever needed addressing. December came with a storm that was quieter than the one they'd driven through 11 months ago, the kind of steady snow that fell without drama and covered everything evenly. And Summit Haven's first residential session ran through the second week of the month with 6 veterans, 4 service dogs, 2 families, and a staff of 3 that Dr. Keyes had assembled with the same directness she applied to everything. The feedback was informal and specific and honest. The kind of feedback that was actually useful rather than the kind designed to manage the feelings of the person receiving it. Carter told Cole, over coffee in the main room on the 3rd day, that this was the first place he'd been since his discharge where nobody had asked him to explain himself. "That's the point," Cole said. "I know, I'm just—" Carter looked at his mug. "Sane." "Yeah," Cole said, "I heard you." The criminal investigation into Victor Ashford concluded its preliminary phase in February, 14 months after the courthouse ruling. The charges that were filed, financial fraud, conspiracy, misuse of fiduciary authority, would take considerably longer to fully resolve through the legal system, which was the nature of complex financial cases. Ellis kept Cole informed in the calibrated way Ellis did everything, providing what was relevant without requiring Cole to be more engaged in it than was useful. Victor's personal attorney was no longer Caldwell. The new attorney was more conservative and filed fewer aggressive motions. Cole received one communication from Victor directly, which arrived not through attorneys but through the mail, a sealed envelope with Victor's personal return address and Cole's apartment address written in the same deliberate handwriting that had signed the financial memos in Patricia Knoll's envelope, which Cole recognized and which was therefore interesting. The handwriting of a man who'd written documents designed to diminish Cole, and the same handwriting asking on a single page whether Cole would be willing to have a conversation. Not with attorneys, not in a formal context. A conversation. Cole read the letter twice, set it on the table, poured a coffee, read it again. Then he called Ellis. "I got a letter from Victor," he said. A pause. "What kind of letter?" "Asking to talk, directly, outside the legal context. He can't ask you to—" "He's not asking about the case. He's asking about Emma and Logan." A longer pause this time. "It's your call," Ellis said. "The legal proceedings don't require you to have any communication with him. The protective order restricts unsupervised contact with the children, not with you." "I know." "What are you thinking?" Cole looked out the window of the apartment. They were still in the apartment because Cole had decided not to rush the housing question, because some decisions were better made after things settled rather than before. "I'm thinking he's their grandfather," Cole said, "and I'm thinking Claire kept that separate from what she thought of what he'd done." A pause. "I know she did," Ellis said quietly. "Did she say that to you?" She said, she hoped the children would know him eventually, under different circumstances. A beat. She said the problem with her father wasn't that he was incapable of love, it was that he'd convinced himself love and control were the same thing. Another pause. She said that was fixable, if he ever decided to fix it. Cole sat with that. I'm going to meet him, Cole said. Okay. Not at his house. Neutral ground. Obviously. And not until after the first Summit Haven session completes. I need to be clear-headed. Also sensible. Ellis paused. Cole, you understand that he might be doing this for tactical reasons. I know he might be. And you're going anyway. He's their grandfather, Cole said again. And I'm not Victor Ashford. I don't make decisions based on what benefits my position. A long pause on Ellis's end. No, Ellis said. You don't. They met in the first week of March at Wren's coffee shop on the south end of Birch Avenue, the same table in the back corner where Patricia Knoll had sat with her padded envelope and her 11 years. Cole arrived first and took the corner seat and ordered a coffee and waited. Victor came in 3 minutes later and found Cole's eyes before he'd fully cleared the entrance, which Cole noted. He wasn't scanning the room looking for Cole. He'd known where Cole would be. Either he'd been here before and knew the corner table, or he understood enough about Cole to know how Cole would orient in a room. He sat across from Cole without ceremony, ordered a black coffee from the server who came immediately, and for about 15 seconds neither of them said anything. The coffee shop was mid-morning quiet. 2 people working on laptops, an older couple near the window with their coats still on. Victor looked tired. Not the high-functioning tired of the courthouse corridor. Something more settled, the fatigue of a man who'd been carrying something heavy for long enough that it had changed his posture. Thank you for coming, Victor said. You said you wanted to talk, Cole said. I'm here. A pause. I'm not going to try to explain what I did, Victor said. I've spent the last several months being very clearly told that explanations aren't the same as accountability, and I've had enough experience with consequences now to understand the distinction. He held his coffee mug without drinking from it. I'm here because Emma and Logan are my grandchildren. They are the only piece of my daughter that exists in the world, and I spent the last several months of her life, and the months after it acting in ways that he started differently. I told myself I was protecting them. I was protecting an asset. I'm capable of telling the difference between those two things now. I wasn't then. Cole looked at him. I'm not asking you to forgive anything, Victor said. I'm asking whether there's a version of the future in which I know my grandchildren, under your terms, your rules, whatever structure you decide is appropriate. He met Cole's eyes. I understand if the answer is no. The coffee shop moved around them in its ordinary morning way. Cole looked at Victor Ashford, at the face that held Claire's jaw and the eyes that didn't hold anything of her that Cole could see, and thought about Emma saying we don't let them in the specific meaning of we in that sentence, thought about Logan naming a trail, thought about Claire's letter and the sentence that had lived in him since the night he'd read it by flashlight. The greatest inheritance was never the money. Emma and Logan make their own choices about who they spend time with, Cole said. They're not tools for reconciliation, and they're not prizes for changed behavior. They want to know you. When they're old enough to make that choice clearly, I won't stand in the way of that. Victor was very still. But understand, Cole continued, that you don't get access to that choice by earning my forgiveness. You earn it from them. And the way you earn it from them is by being the kind of person they decide is worth knowing, not by being Victor Ashford with his name on buildings. He looked at Victor steadily. By being someone who shows up, who listens, who asks about their lives without having an agenda. That's it. A long silence. That's harder than you make it sound, Victor said. I know, Cole said. Most worthwhile things are. Victor looked at his coffee. She really did think of everything. Yeah, she really did. She was more like her mother than I ever... He stopped. I wasted time I didn't know I was wasting. He said it to the table, not to Cole, which made it more honest. That's the part I can't fix. Cole didn't say anything to that. There was nothing to say. It was true. And true things that couldn't be changed didn't need a response. They just needed to be acknowledged, which Victor had done, and acknowledged without running from, which took a kind of courage Cole hadn't been sure Victor Ashford possessed. He revised the assessment, slightly. They finished their coffees. Cole drove back to Summit Haven in the mid-March light that was starting to carry the first suggestion of something other than winter. The angle slightly different, the snow thinner on the south-facing slopes, the valley floor beginning to show brown through the white cover. He pulled into the Summit Haven lot and sat in the truck for a moment. The building was solid. The main room had a better light fixture. Emma had found one in a second-hand architectural salvage place in Missoula and had overseen its installation with the seriousness of a general overseeing a defensive emplacement. There were 3 resident cabins behind the main structure, each one built to the siting principles Emma had laid out on the first sketch she'd made in the cabin in the blizzard, and a trail that ran along the ridge above the property with a carved wooden sign at the trailhead that said Whitmore Trail, which was Logan's research choice, and about which he was appropriately extremely pleased with himself. Ranger was sitting on the porch when Cole got out of the truck. Cole stood at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at him. "Hey," he said. Ranger looked at him with those amber eyes that had seen everything Cole had seen in the last 11 months, and a great deal before that, and were still fundamentally undisturbed by any of it. He thumped his tail once on the porch boards. Cole went up the steps and sat beside him and looked at the valley. It was quiet, the way mountain country was quiet in early spring, deeply, actively quiet, full of the sound of things that were just beginning to decide they were going to start again. Below the ridge, Silver Birch Crossing was going about its day in the way small mountain towns went about their days, ordinary and self-sufficient and largely indifferent to the dramas that played out in its courthouse and its coffee shops and its county roads. Cole thought about a moving crew that hadn't knocked, about a storm that had come in from the northwest and covered everything, about a dog who had found a box under a floor because that was his job and he had never stopped doing his job, about a woman who had built a fortress from a hospital bed because she understood that love, when it was real and thorough, made plans. He sat on the porch of Summit Haven with his hand on Ranger's back and the valley below him in the thin March light, and he understood, not for the first time, but for the first time in a way that had no grief mixed into it, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because it was easy, not because it had cost nothing to get here, because someone had believed it was possible before he could see it himself, and had built him the road, and all he'd had to do, all he'd ever had to do, was follow where the dog led. The people who get written off are never the ones the story ends with. The ones who survived the storm are the ones who had someone build them a door before the storm arrived, and the ones who build that door for the next person who needs it.